Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Betrayal. Harry Kincaid stared at the rain-slicked window of his modest apartment, watching droplets race down the glass as he nursed his third whiskey of the night. The Chicago skyline blurred beyond the glass, lights smearing into watercolor streaks that matched his current state of mind. At 42, Harry never imagined he'd be starting over, living in a one-bedroom apartment that could fit entirely inside the master bath of his former home. The envelope on the coffee table stared back at him accusingly. Divorce papers, now finalized. 15 years of marriage dissolved in a flurry of legal jargon and bitter arguments. And worst of all, the betrayal that had precipitated it all still burned like acid in his chest. Veronica Kincaid, now back to Veronica Blackwell, had been his college sweetheart, the woman he'd built his life around. They'd met at Northwestern, where he'd been a scholarship kid studying finance, and she'd been a legacy admission pursuing marketing. From different worlds, but somehow they'd clicked. Harry had worked his way up from nothing, the son of a factory worker and a waitress from the South Side, who'd fought for every opportunity. Veronica had come from old Chicago money, but it seemed refreshingly unpretentious when they'd met. For 15 years, he believed they were building something together. He'd thrown himself into his career as an investment banker, working 100-hour weeks to give them the life he thought they both wanted. Their Lake Shore Drive condo, the weekend house in Michigan, the European vacations, all financed primarily on his increasingly substantial income. Veronica had worked, too, as a marketing executive at Preston Media, but her career had stalled after a few years. Harry never minded being the primary breadwinner. He'd been raised to believe that was a man's responsibility, despite Veronica's occasional comments about feeling kept. But the work had taken its toll. All those late nights, the missed anniversaries, the postponed vacations. Harry had told himself it was temporary, that once he made partner, they could finally start the family Veronica had been putting off. But by the time he'd reached that milestone 3 years ago, something fundamental had shifted between them. The memory of that day 8 months ago still made his stomach churn. He'd come home early from a business trip, intending to surprise Veronica for their anniversary. Instead, he'd been the one surprised by the sounds emanating from their bedroom, and by the identity of the man he'd found in his bed, Dexter Calloway, his supposed best friend since business school and his closest colleague at Meridian Financial. The confrontation that followed still played in his nightmares. Veronica hadn't even seemed particularly ashamed. "You never hear, Harry. What did you expect?" Her cold eyes had assessed him like he was a disappointing investment. "Dex actually makes time for me. He listens. When was the last time you really saw me?" Dexter had been marginally more apologetic, but his eyes told a different story. There was a gleam of triumph there, a look Harry had seen before when Dex closed big deals. Harry had always known Dexter envied him, his success, his faster promotions, and apparently his wife. But he'd never imagined his friend would cross this line. What followed was a blur of rage, pain, and increasingly vicious legal battles. Veronica had hired Annette Sawyer, the most cutthroat divorce attorney in Chicago. Harry had been blindsided by the financial demands. Veronica wanted half of everything, including his upcoming bonus and stock options. She claimed she'd sacrificed her own career advancement to support his. But the real blow came when Harry discovered the debt. Over the past 5 years, Veronica had opened multiple credit cards in his name, running up astronomical balances on luxury purchases and secret getaways. Many, he later discovered, with Dexter. She'd also taken out a second mortgage on their vacation home without his knowledge, forging his signature on the documents. By the time the forensic accountants finished their work, Harry was left with a staggering $180,000 debt and a credit score in ruins. The legal fight that ensued drained what remained of his savings. Despite clear evidence of fraud, Veronica's legal team managed to drag the proceedings out until Harry simply couldn't afford to continue. His own attorney, Phoebe Winters, had been good but outgunned by Veronica's family money and connections. In the end, Harry accepted a settlement that left him financially devastated, but at least free of Veronica. The professional fallout was equally catastrophic. Unable to face working alongside Dexter, Harry had resigned from Meridian Financial, walking away from the partnership he'd spent 15 years building. His reputation in Chicago's close-knit financial community suffered as rumors, many started by Dexter, painted him as unstable and difficult. The ultimate humiliation came when he learned that Dexter had been promoted to his former position. Harry downed the last of his whiskey and turned from the window. The small apartment felt like a prison, walls closing in with each passing day. Rock bottom, they called it. The place where you had nowhere to go but up. His phone buzzed with a text from Phoebe, who had become something of a friend during the divorce proceedings. Fell lead on something. Breakfast tomorrow, 8 a.m., usual place. Harry texted back a thumbs-up emoji. In his darkest moments over the past months, Phoebe's unwavering belief in him had been a lifeline. Unlike most of his so-called friends who had melted away during the divorce, she had stood by him, even as her professional obligations to him ended. There was nothing romantic between them. She was happily married with twin boys, but she'd become the sister he never had. As he prepared for bed, Harry caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him was a shadow of his former self. Gaunt face, dark circles under his eyes, the beginning of gray at his temples. 15 years building a life, 8 months watching it crumble. Enough, he whispered to his reflection. Pity and whiskey weren't going to fix this. He needed a plan. Little did Harry know that the meeting with Phoebe tomorrow would set in motion a chain of events that would transform his pain into purpose, his humiliation into calculation, and his defeat into the most meticulously planned revenge Chicago's business world had ever seen. Chapter 2. The Opportunity. Milo's Diner on North Clark Street had become Harry's regular breakfast spot since moving to his new apartment. Affordable, unpretentious, and mercifully far from the upscale establishments frequented by his former colleagues, it offered anonymity along with decent coffee. Phoebe Winters was already seated in a corner booth when Harry arrived, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a manila folder beside her coffee cup. At 38, she had a reputation as one of the most thorough attorneys in family law, though her compassion sometimes put her at odds with the more predatory members of her profession. "You look marginally less terrible than last week," she greeted him with characteristic bluntness as he slid into the booth. "Your compliments never fail to warm my heart," Harry replied, signaling to the waitress for coffee. "Save the charm for what I'm about to tell you." Phoebe pushed the folder toward him. "Remember how you mentioned wanting to get out of Chicago? Maybe start fresh somewhere?" Harry nodded, opening the folder to find printouts about Nexus Technologies, a mid-sized tech company based in Denver. "One of my clients is on their board," Phoebe continued. "They're looking for a new CFO. Current one is retiring. Company's solid, but underperforming. They need someone with your financial background who can help position them for acquisition." Harry flipped through the materials, a spark of interest cutting through his usual fog of despair. "Why would they look at me? I've been out of the game for months, and my departure from Meridian wasn't exactly smooth. Because my client, Josephine Alvarez, knows the real story, not the bullshit Dexter's been spreading." Phoebe leaned forward. "She also knows talent when she sees it, and she remembers the work you did restructuring that tech portfolio for Meridian 3 years ago." For the first time in months, Harry felt a flicker of his old confidence. That tech portfolio had been his idea, one that Dexter had initially opposed but later claimed credit for when it succeeded. "There's something else," Phoebe said, her voice dropping slightly. "Something that might interest you particularly. Guess who Nexus's biggest client is?" Harry raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Preston Media," Phoebe said with a small, knowing smile. "Your ex-wife's employer." Harry's hands stilled on the folder. Preston Media, where Veronica had worked for the past decade. An image of her corporate headshot flashed in his mind. Perfect smile, calculating eyes. She had clawed her way to creative director 2 years ago, a position she'd celebrate by spending a small fortune redecorating her office, mostly on his credit cards, he now knew. "The connection isn't well known," Phoebe continued. "Preston uses Nexus for their back-end systems. Boring, but essential infrastructure stuff. The contract is up for renewal in 6 months. Harry's mind was already racing, calculating angles and possibilities. Is Josephine expecting me to help them keep the Preston account? Phoebe shrugged. She's expecting you to help make Nexus profitable enough to attract acquisition offers. How you handle individual clients is up to you. But, she hesitated, I should mention that Preston's CEO, Martin Chambers, is close friends with Bradley Price, Nexus's founder. Harry processed this information, memories surfacing of charity galas where he'd seen Veronica chatting with Bradley Price, a silver-haired tech pioneer known for his philanthropy and political connections. He vaguely recalled that Price had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Nexus, but remained chairman of the board. There's one more thing, Phoebe said, pulling another document from her briefcase. Your friend Dexter? He's been making moves. Word is he's angling to get Meridian to acquire Preston Media. Apparently, he's been cozying up to their executive team. Harry felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. If Dexter succeeded, he would be positioning himself even closer to Veronica professionally. The thought of them building their careers together, perhaps using strategies and contacts Harry had developed, made something hardened inside him calcify further. When does Josephine want to meet? He asked, his decision already made. Tomorrow. She's in Chicago for a conference. Phoebe studied him carefully. Harry, I'm telling you this as a friend, not your lawyer. This could be a genuine fresh start. Don't let bitterness cloud your judgment. Harry met her gaze steadily. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. I just need to get back in the game. But as they finished breakfast and discussed the logistics of the meeting, Harry's mind was already plotting a course far more complex than a simple career move. For 8 months, he had been reacting to the betrayal, to the divorce, to the financial devastation. Now, for the first time, he saw a path forward, a way to reclaim control. The meeting with Josephine Alvarez the next day went better than Harry dared hope. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a background in venture capital. She cut through the pleasantries quickly, addressing the Meridian situation head-on. I know what Callaway's been saying about you, she said bluntly. I also know it's bullshit. The numbers from your division during your tenure speak for themselves. 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee later, Harry had a job offer. CFO of Nexus Technologies, with a relocation package to Denver and a salary that would allow him to begin rebuilding his finances. The position came with significant equity options, standard for tech companies, but a departure from his banking background. We need fresh eyes, Josephine explained. Someone who can see opportunities others miss. That restructuring you did at Meridian for the tech portfolio, that's exactly the kind of thinking Nexus needs. As he left the meeting, Harry made a detour to the public library, where he spent hours researching everything he could find about Nexus Technologies, Preston Media, and the interconnections between the companies. What he discovered confirmed his initial suspicions. Nexus was undervalued, but positioned in a sector ripe for consolidation. With the right strategies, it could become an attractive acquisition target or acquirer. 2 weeks later, Harry Kincaid left Chicago for Denver, leaving behind the wreckage of his former life. As his plane took off, he gazed down at the city where he'd experienced his greatest triumphs and most devastating betrayals. He felt something shift inside him, pain crystallizing into purpose. In his briefcase was a notebook filled with initial observations and strategies for Nexus, legitimate ideas that would impress his new employers. But in a password-protected file on his laptop was another plan entirely. A meticulous step-by-step blueprint for how Harrison Kincaid would rise from the ashes, take control of not just his life, but the fate of those who had betrayed him, and exact a revenge so complete that Chicago's business world would never forget it. The plane banked west, and Harry turned his gaze toward the Rocky Mountains appearing on the horizon. A new chapter was beginning. Chapter 3, The Rise. The Denver morning sun painted the Nexus Technologies headquarters in golden light as Harry stepped through the glass doors for his first day. The modern building, with its open floor plan and mountain views, couldn't have been more different from the traditional banking environment he'd left behind in Chicago. For a moment, doubt flickered. Was he too old school for a tech company culture? but he squared his shoulders and headed for the reception desk. "Harrison Kincaid for Josephine Alvarez," he said to the receptionist. What followed was a whirlwind day of introductions, orientation meetings, and the first glimpses of the challenges facing him. Nexus, he quickly confirmed, was indeed a company with solid foundations, but suffering from drift and missed opportunities. The previous CFO, now semi-retired, but staying on as a consultant for the transition, was a traditionalist who had failed to capitalize on new market trends. As Harry settled into his spacious new office, with its views of the Rockies, he felt that peculiar clarity that had always come to him when facing complex financial puzzles. Beneath the surface problems lay opportunities that others had missed. Over the next 3 months, Harry immersed himself in Nexus's operations. By day, he pored over financial reports, met with department heads, and began implementing careful efficiency measures. By night, in his new downtown apartment, he worked on his private project, mapping connections, identifying pressure points, and refining his ultimate objective. His dedication did not go unnoticed. Josephine became an ally and mentor, impressed by his work ethic and fresh perspectives. Bradley Price, the founder who still chaired the board, began seeking Harry's counsel on strategic matters beyond finance. "You've got a way of seeing around corners," Price told him one evening after a particularly productive board meeting. "That's rare." Harry had smiled modestly, but felt a surge of satisfaction. Price's trust was essential to his plans. The turning point came 4 months into his tenure, during the quarterly review of client accounts. The Preston Media contract, up for renewal in 2 months, was flagged as at risk. Preston's new procurement team was shopping around, suggesting they might move their business elsewhere. "This could be a significant hit to our bottom line," the account manager explained nervously. "Preston represents 12% of our recurring revenue." Harry spoke up, his voice calm. "I think I can help with this one." Josephine raised an eyebrow. "You have connections at Preston?" "I know their business model well," Harry replied carefully. "And I understand what they're looking for in a tech partner." Let me take point on this. What Harry didn't mention was his secret weapon, Calvin Reeves, Preston's head of IT operations. 3 weeks earlier, Harry had coincidentally met Calvin at a tech conference in Boulder. Over drinks, he discovered that Calvin was frustrated with Preston's leadership, particularly their lack of understanding of the company's technical needs. Harry had cultivated the relationship carefully, positioning himself as a sympathetic ear and, gradually, a trusted advisor. 2 days after the meeting, Harry flew to Chicago for his first face-to-face with Preston's procurement team. Walking into the Preston Media offices felt surreal, knowing Veronica worked somewhere in the building, perhaps just floors away. But he compartmentalized those feelings, focusing on the task at hand. The meeting was a masterclass in strategic negotiation. Harry presented a proposal that addressed Preston's concerns while actually increasing Nexus's profit margins through more efficient service delivery. He had done his homework, identifying pain points in Preston's operations that even their own team hadn't fully articulated. Calvin, present at the meeting, backed Harry's assessment with enthusiasm, creating a powerful alliance that the procurement team couldn't easily dismiss. By the time Harry returned to Denver, he had not only secured the Preston contract renewal, but had expanded its scope by 30%. The win cemented his reputation at Nexus as a miracle worker. "Whatever they're paying you, it's not enough," Bradley Price joked during the celebration dinner, raising a glass in Harry's honor. As summer turned to fall in Denver, Harry's influence at Nexus grew exponentially. His financial restructuring plan was showing results, with the company's valuation climbing steadily. He built a loyal team, identifying and promoting talented employees who had been overlooked by previous management. Among them was Zoe Chun, a brilliant systems analyst who became his right hand, impressed by his willingness to listen to ideas from all levels of the organization. "Previous management would never have given someone like me a seat at the table," she told him gratefully after he promoted her to Director of Strategic Analysis. "Their loss," Harry replied simply. "Talent is talent, regardless of age or background." It was a philosophy that earned him fierce loyalty throughout the company. In October, 7 months after joining Nexus, Harry made his boldest move yet. During a strategy retreat in Aspen, he proposed that Nexus should consider acquisitions of its own rather than positioning itself to be acquired. "We've been thinking too small," he told the leadership team, standing before a presentation that laid out his vision. "With our improved financials and the current market conditions, we're in a position to be predators rather than prey." He outlined a strategy to acquire smaller companies with complementary technologies, building Nexus into a more comprehensive service provider that could compete with larger players. The presentation was met with stunned silence, followed by excited discussion. Bradley Price pulled Harry aside afterward. "This is a fundamental shift in direction," he said, studying Harry intently. "You realize this would mean raising significant capital?" Harry nodded. "I've already had preliminary conversations with several investment groups who are interested. No commitments, just taking the temperature." What he didn't mention was that one of those groups was led by Warren Blackwell, Veronica's father, though they had never met in person. The older Blackwell, largely estranged from his daughter after a falling out years ago, had no idea of the connection. Harry had approached him through intermediaries, careful to keep his identity hidden behind layers of professional contacts. "I trust your judgment," Price said finally. "Present the full plan to the board next month." As Harry drove back to Denver after the retreat, a rare snowstorm blanketing the mountains around him, he allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction that went beyond his revenge plans. He was good at this, building, creating value, seeing possibilities others missed. For the first time since the divorce, he felt truly alive, his mind engaged with challenges worthy of his abilities. That evening, as the first snow of the season fell outside his apartment windows, Harry received a text from Calvin Reeves in Chicago. "She's asking questions about you. Told her nothing as agreed. Moving to Phase 2. Harry stared at the message, a cold smile forming. Phase 2 indeed. The board would approve his acquisition strategy. He was certain of it. And the first company on his target list? A small but pivotal marketing analytics firm that served as Preston Media's secret weapon for their most lucrative client campaigns. His phone buzzed again with another message, this one from an unknown number with a Chicago area code. "Long time no see, stranger. Heard you're making waves in Denver. Drinks next time you're in town? For old time's sake. Veronica." She'd gotten his new number somehow. Harry felt a momentary surge of the old pain, quickly replaced by cold calculation. So she was aware of his success at Nexus. Good. That meant whispers of his resurrection were reaching Chicago, just as he'd intended. He didn't reply to the message, simply saved the number. It would be useful later. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a clean white blanket. Harry gazed out at the transformed landscape, finding it fitting. In nature, destruction often preceded renewal. Forest fires cleared deadwood to make way for new growth. The Colorado winter killed off the weak to ensure the strong survived until spring. He was no longer the man who had left Chicago broken and humiliated. That version of Harrison Kincaid had died in the ruins of his former life. The man who stood in this Denver apartment, watching the snow transform the world, was someone new, someone forged in betrayal's fire, tempered by pain, and now coldly, precisely focused on the execution of a plan years in the making. Phase 2 would begin tomorrow, and neither Veronica nor Dexter would see it coming until it was far too late. Chapter 4. The Acquisition. The holiday season transformed Denver into a postcard-perfect winter wonderland, but Harrison Kincaid barely noticed. December found him working 16-hour days, his office at Nexus Technologies becoming more home than his sparsely furnished apartment. The board had enthusiastically approved his acquisition strategy in November, allocating a substantial war chest for the right targets. Now Harry was deep in the execution phase, evaluating potential acquisitions with ruthless efficiency. "You should at least put up a Christmas tree," Zoe teased, bringing him coffee one evening when most of the staff had already left for a holiday party. At 29, Zoe had proven herself invaluable, brilliant with data analysis and unafraid to challenge his thinking when necessary. "Christmas isn't really my thing anymore," Harry replied, not looking up from the financial models on his screen. Zoe perched on the edge of his desk. This acquisition obsession is getting a little scary, boss. The DataSync deal is progressing well. You can take a breath. DataSync Analytics was the marketing analytics firm Harry had identified as his first target, the one that provided crucial services to Preston Media. The initial approach had gone better than expected, with DataSync's founders receptive to Nexus's offer. "We're not there yet," Harry said, finally looking up at Zoe. "I want this deal closed before the new year." What he didn't tell Zoe was why the timing was so critical. Through his careful cultivation of relationships in Chicago, Harry had learned that Dexter Calloway was planning to propose a merger between Meridian Financial and Preston Media in January. The move would consolidate Dexter's influence and likely lead to a substantial promotion, possibly even a path to becoming CEO of the merged entity within a few years. Harry couldn't allow that to happen. The DataSync acquisition was just the first move in a complex chess game. Once under Nexus's umbrella, Harry planned to review all client contracts, including Preston's. With access to Preston's proprietary campaign data through DataSync, he would gain leverage that could derail Dexter's merger plans. "You should come to the party," Zoe said, interrupting his thoughts. "The team misses their fearless leader." Harry smiled wryly. 1 hour. Then I'm back to the grindstone. The holiday party at Josephine's elegant home in Cherry Creek provided a welcome distraction. Harry found himself actually enjoying the company of his colleagues outside the office. Even Bradley Price made an appearance, pulling Harry aside for a personal chat. "You've transformed this company in less than a year," Price said, his hand warm on Harry's shoulder. "I didn't think it was possible." "Just getting started," Harry replied modestly. Price studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when Josephine first suggested you for the position, I was skeptical. Your background was impressive, but that mess in Chicago raised red flags." He raised a hand to forestall Harry's response. "I'm glad I listened to her. Whatever demons drove you out of Chicago, they've served you. And us, well, if only you knew," Harry thought, maintaining his composed expression. "I'm curious," Price continued, lowering his voice. "This push toward marketing tech acquisitions. Is there a personal angle there? I remember your ex-wife was in marketing." Harry tensed imperceptibly. Price was sharper than he'd given him credit for. "Just following the data," he said smoothly. "Marketing tech has the highest growth potential in our sector." Price nodded, seemingly satisfied, but Harry made a mental note to be more careful around him. The older man hadn't built a tech empire by being easily fooled. As January approached, the DataSync deal entered its final stages. Harry flew to Chicago for the closing negotiations, a trip that served multiple purposes. While the legal teams finalized the acquisition paperwork, Harry scheduled a discreet meeting with Warren Blackwell, Veronica's estranged father and the investor he'd been courting for Nexus's expansion capital. The elder Blackwell, now 72, welcomed Harry to his Lake Forest mansion on a bitter cold Chicago afternoon. With silver hair and the same striking blue eyes as his daughter, Warren had a reputation as a brilliant but ruthless investor. The falling out with Veronica, Harry knew, had occurred when she married him rather than the scion of another wealthy family Warren had favored. "Your proposal intrigues me, Mr. Kincaid," Warren said as they sat in his wood-paneled study. "Nexus has shown remarkable growth under your guidance." "We're just getting started," Harry replied, echoing his words to Bradley Price. "The DataSync acquisition is the first step in creating a comprehensive technology ecosystem that will revolutionize how marketing firms operate." Warren studied the proposal documents, his expression revealing nothing. "And Preston Media is one of DataSync's major clients, I see." "Among others," Harry acknowledged. "We anticipate significant cross-selling opportunities." What Harry didn't explicitly state was that Preston Media would soon find itself dependent on Nexus Technologies for its most profitable client relationships, a dependency he planned to exploit. "I understand Martin Chambers is considering a merger with Meridian Financial," Warren commented, seemingly casual. Harry kept his expression neutral, though internally he was impressed by Warren's intelligence network. "I've heard rumors," he replied. "Do you have thoughts on that potential move?" Warren's mouth twisted in distaste. "Chambers is a fool if he goes through with it. Meridian will strip Preston for parts and discard the remains. Harry leaned forward slightly. Would it concern you if that happened? Why should it? Warren asked coolly. I have no stake in Preston. But your daughter works there, Harry pointed out, watching carefully for the reaction. Warren's eyes narrowed. You've done your homework, Mr. Kincaid. Yes, Veronica is their creative director. We're not close, as you seem to know, but I wouldn't wish unemployment on her. He paused, studying Harry with new interest. Do you know my daughter? It was the moment of truth, the calculated risk Harry had built into his plan. He could lie, maintain his cover, and proceed as planned. Or he could take a gamble on Warren Blackwell's notorious distaste for weakness and dishonesty. I was married to her for 15 years, Harry said evenly, meeting the older man's gaze without flinching. Warren Blackwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, surprise, followed by something like respect. Well, he said after a long moment, that puts an interesting spin on matters. Over the next hour, a remarkable alliance formed. Warren, it emerged, had never forgiven Veronica for rejecting his guidance in her choice of husband. The irony that he now approved of Harry, after the marriage had ended, wasn't lost on either of them. But more significantly, Warren harbored a deep resentment toward Dexter Calloway, who had been the suitor he'd originally favored for his daughter. He approached me first, Warren revealed, about investing in this Meridian-Preston merger. Pitched it as a way to reunite the family through business. His disgust was evident, as if I'd hand him capital after he showed his true character. His true character? Harry prompted. Warren waved a dismissive hand. The man's a parasite, always has been, attaches himself to talent and rides their success. Did it with you at Meridian, for what I gather. Now he's doing it with Chambers at Preston. He fixed Harry with a penetrating stare. What exactly are you planning, Mr. Kincaid? Beyond business acquisitions, I mean. Harry considered his response carefully. Warren Blackwell could be a powerful ally or a dangerous enemy. The risk was calculated, but significant. I'm planning to build Nexus into the dominant tech provider in the marketing sector, he said, each word precise. In the process, I expect certain individuals who have underestimated me will learn the cost of their miscalculation. A slow smile spread across Warren's face. Now that, he said, is an investment thesis I can get behind. He extended his hand. You'll have your capital, Mr. Kincaid, with one condition, which is, when the time comes for the lesson to be delivered, Warren said, his smile turning cold, I want a front row seat. The DataSync acquisition closed 2 days later, announced to the business world with appropriate fanfare. The press release emphasized the synergies between Nexus and DataSync, the expanded capabilities the combined company would offer, and the growth opportunities ahead. What it didn't mention was that Harrison Kincaid now had access to the digital lifeblood of Preston Media's most important client campaigns, or that Warren Blackwell's investment fund had quietly taken a 15% stake in Nexus with options for more. Nor did it mention that Harry had finally responded to Veronica's text, agreeing to meet for drinks during his Chicago trip, a meeting he deliberately scheduled and then stood up, leaving her waiting alone at the upscale bar where they'd had their first date 16 years earlier. It was petty, perhaps, but it served a purpose, letting her know he remembered everything and that the power dynamic between them had shifted. The 3 increasingly angry texts she sent as she waited confirmed she'd gotten the message. Back in Denver, Harry entered a new phase of his plan. With DataSync under the Nexus umbrella, he initiated a comprehensive review of all client contracts, ostensibly to identify optimization opportunities. Zoe Chun led the analysis team, unaware that their work was feeding directly into Harry's personal agenda. There's something odd about the Preston Media account, Zoe reported one afternoon in late January. Their campaigns for luminous brands consistently outperform industry benchmarks by margins that don't make statistical sense. Harry, who had been waiting for precisely this discovery, feigned surprise. Show me. Zoe walked him through the data anomalies, patterns that suggested Preston Media might be manipulating campaign results to retain their largest client. Nothing definitively illegal, but certainly ethically questionable. Good catch, Harry told her. Document everything, but keep this between us for now. I want to understand exactly what's happening before we raise any alarms. As January turned to February, Harry set the next phase of his plan in motion. Nexus announced a client success program that involved more direct integration between their systems and those of key clients like Press Media. Calvin Reeves, still Harry's inside man at Preston, championed the program internally, ensuring Preston signed on. The integration gave Nexus unprecedented visibility into Preston's operations, including the questionable Luminous Brands campaigns. Harry now had everything he needed to disrupt the Meridian-Preston merger talks, which, according to his sources, were progressing toward a spring announcement. But he waited, patient as a spider at the center of its web. The timing had to be perfect. In March, almost exactly 1 year after he joined Nexus, Harry received the call he'd been anticipating from Bradley Price. "Martin Chambers wants to meet," Price said without preamble. "He's flying to Denver next week. Says it's urgent." Harry allowed himself a small smile. Did he mention what it's about? No, but he sounded nervous. "Whatever it is, handle it carefully. Preston's still an important client." "Of course," Harry replied, his tone the essence of professional concern. "I'll make myself completely available." As he hung up, Harry opened his laptop and pulled up a secure file titled Endgame. Inside was a detailed step-by-step plan for the final phase of his revenge, a series of calculated moves that would bring both Veronica and Dexter to their knees professionally while simultaneously elevating Nexus and Harry himself to new heights. The pieces were all in place. Martin Chambers' panic call was just the beginning of the endgame. Harry glanced at the calendar on his desk. March 15th, the Ides of March. How fitting. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, it had been the day of reckoning when betrayal was answered with blood. In Harrison Kincaid's carefully orchestrated drama, it would mark the beginning of a different kind of execution, one no less complete for its lack of physical violence. He closed the laptop and gazed out at the Denver skyline, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Stage 2 was complete. It was time for the final act. Chapter 5, The Confrontation. Martin Chambers arrived at Nexus headquarters on a Tuesday morning, the Denver sunshine doing nothing to brighten his haggard expression. At 58, the CEO of Press Media had always projected confident authority in their previous interactions. Today, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Harry arranged to meet him in Nexus's executive conference room rather than his office, a subtle power move that placed Chambers on unfamiliar territory. As a further calculated touch, he kept the Preston CEO waiting for 15 minutes. Not long enough to be overtly insulting, but sufficient to establish the new dynamic between them. "Martin," Harry greeted him with professional cordiality as he finally entered the room. "What brings you to Denver? I hope there's no issue with our services." Chambers cut straight to the point. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Kincaid?" Harry raised an eyebrow, the picture of innocence. "I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific." "This integration program," Chambers snapped. "Your people are crawling through our systems, accessing data well beyond what the agreement stipulated." Harry kept his expression neutral. "The integration is proceeding according to the specifications your team approved. If there are concerns, I'm happy to review the parameters." "Don't play games." Chambers leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The Luminous Brands campaign data." And there it was, the confirmation Harry had been waiting for. Chambers knew they'd discovered the manipulated campaign metrics. "Ah," Harry said, allowing understanding to dawn on his face. "You're referring to the statistical anomalies our analytics team flagged." "Yes, those did raise some questions." Chambers paled slightly. "Those are proprietary methodologies. Your people had no business." "Our people were doing exactly what they're paid to do," Harry interrupted, his tone hardening. "Identifying irregularities in data patterns that might affect our system's performance. The real question, Martin, is why Preston Media's results for Luminous Brands consistently show engagement rates 30% above verified third-party metrics." A tense silence filled the room. Chambers seemed to be calculating his options, his eyes darting to the door as if contemplating escape. "It's not what you think," he said finally. No. Harry's voice was dangerously soft. Because what I think, based on the data, is that Preston has been systematically overstating campaign results to justify premium billing to your most lucrative client. I think you've been doing it for at least 3 years. And I think if Luminous Brands found out, they not only fire Preston, but possibly pursue legal action for fraud. Chambers' face had gone from pale to ashen. You can't prove anything. Harry smiled thinly. I don't need to prove it, Martin. The data speaks for itself. But rest assured, we have no intention of taking this information to Luminous Brands. He paused deliberately. At least not at this time. Understanding dawned in Chambers' eyes. What do you want? First, Harry said, leaning back in his chair, I want you to terminate all merger discussions with Meridian Financial. Chambers stared at him in shock. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know. Harry cut him off. What matters is that the merger stops. Today. Impossible. Chambers shook his head. We're weeks away from announcing. Contracts are being drafted. Dexter Calloway will be disappointed, I'm sure. Harry finished for him. That's unfortunate, but not my concern. Chambers studied him with new wariness. This is personal for you, isn't it? Calloway mentioned there was bad blood, but I had no idea you'd go this far. Harry didn't take the bait. This is business, Martin. Speaking of which, I have a counterproposal for you. From his briefcase, Harry withdrew a folder containing documents outlining a strategic partnership between Nexus and Preston Media. One that would give Nexus significant control over Preston's technology infrastructure and, by extension, its business operations. Instead of merging with Meridian, you partner with Nexus, Harry explained as Chambers skimmed the documents with increasing disbelief. We provide enhanced technical capabilities that actually will improve your campaign performance. You maintain operational independence, but integrate your technology stack fully with ours. This is tantamount to a hostile takeover, Chambers protested. Harry shrugged. It's an opportunity, Martin. One with considerable upside for Preston Media. The alternative is watching your largest client walk away when they discover the truth about their campaign metrics. The board will never approve this. Perhaps you should let them decide, Harry suggested mildly. With all the relevant information at hand, of course. The implication hung in the air between them. If Chambers refused, Harry would ensure the Preston board learned about the fraudulent reporting to Luminous Brands, a revelation that would likely cost Chambers his position along with any hope of the Meridian merger. After a long, tense moment, Chambers seemed to deflate. I'll need time to present this properly. Of course, Harry agreed magnanimously. You have 48 hours. Oh, and Martin, this conversation stays between us. If Dexter Calloway gets wind of our discussion, I'll assume you've chosen the alternative path. As Chambers left, visibly shaken, Harry allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before picking up his phone. Warren, he said when the call connected. Phase 1 is complete. Chambers just left. He'll shut down the Meridian talks. Warren Blackwell's dry chuckle came through the line. Well done. How'd he take it? About as expected. Angry, then scared, then resigned. And my daughter? Will she be affected by this shift? Harry hesitated. Despite everything, Warren still occasionally showed flickers of paternal concern. Not immediately. The partnership will actually strengthen Preston's position with her clients. But her relationship with Dexter may experience turbulence. Good, Warren said curtly. She made her choice. Time she lived with the consequences. He paused. Phase 2 begins now. Yes, Harry confirmed. I'll need those introductions we discussed. Consider it done. The Meridian board members in my circle will receive your calls. The next 48 hours unfolded exactly as Harry had anticipated. Martin Chambers, after consulting with Preston's legal counsel, had little choice but to accept Nexus's partnership proposal and terminate the Meridian merger discussions. The announcement sent shockwaves through Chicago's business community. Dexter Calloway, blindsided by the collapse of his carefully orchestrated merger plan, reacted predictably with a furious phone call to Harry. You manipulative bastard, Dexter snarled when Harry answered. I know you're behind this. Hello to you too, Dex, Harry replied calmly. I assume you're calling about the Preston announcement? Don't play innocent. Chambers wouldn't say what happened, but this has your fingerprints all over it. Harry allowed himself to savor the moment. Perhaps Preston simply recognized a better opportunity. Our technology stack is certainly more relevant to their needs than Meridian's financial services. This isn't over, Dexter threatened. You think you can sabotage my deals from your cushy Denver office? I made you, Harrison. Don't forget that. The old Harry might have risen to this bait, might have let anger cloud his judgment. But the man who now sat in the chief financial officer's chair at Nexus Technologies had learned patience. You know, Dex, he said conversationally, I should thank you. What? If you hadn't slept with my wife and helped her destroy me financially, I might never have left Chicago. Never found my true calling here at Nexus. Harry's voice remained pleasant, as if discussing the weather. So in a way, you did me a favor. Dexter's momentary silence spoke volumes. What are you planning, Harry? Planning? I'm just doing my job, Harry replied innocently. Building Nexus into the industry leader it deserves to be. If that occasionally disrupts your plans, well, that's just business, isn't it? After ending the call, Harry immediately phoned Warren Blackwell again. Dexter took the bait. He'll be watching our partnership with Preston, trying to find a way to undermine it. And walking right into your trap, Warren observed with satisfaction. I've arranged the introductions to Meridian's board. First meeting is set for next week in New York. Phase 2 of Harry's plan was perhaps the boldest, using Warren's connections and his own reputation to approach key members of Meridian Financial's board of directors. The objective was not a direct attack on Dexter, but something far more devastating. A stealth campaign to position Nexus for a reverse acquisition of Meridian itself. It was audacious, perhaps even reckless, but Harry had spent months laying the groundwork. Nexus's market value had tripled under his guidance. With Warren Blackwell's investment fund backing them and a strategic partnership with Preston Media adding further credibility, the financial structure was viable. The following week found Harry in New York, meeting discreetly with Meridian board members who had grown increasingly concerned about the company's direction under Dexter's influence. Harry presented them with a vision of Meridian's future that addressed their concerns while promising significant returns, all while casually dropping information that undermined Dexter's position. It's interesting that Callaway pushed so hard for the Preston merger, Harry remarked during one such meeting, especially given what our due diligence revealed about their reporting irregularities with key clients. The board member, a shrewd woman named Lydia Morrison, raised an eyebrow. Reporting irregularities? Harry feigned a moment of regret for having spoken too freely. I shouldn't go into details. Suffice to say, our partnership agreement with Preston includes substantial oversight of their client reporting processes. It was a non-negotiable point for us. The implication was clear. Dexter had either missed critical problems during his merger due diligence or, worse, had known about them and proceeded anyway. Either scenario reflected poorly on his judgment. Similar conversations with other board members over the following weeks gradually eroded Dexter's standing. Meanwhile, Harry continued to build Nexus's value through additional strategic acquisitions and partnerships, each one bringing them closer to the financial position needed for the ultimate move. The confrontation Harry had been both dreading and anticipating finally came in late April, when Veronica Blackwell Kincaid appeared unannounced at his Denver office. Your assistant doesn't seem to think you'll want to see me, she said from the doorway, still striking at 40 with her raven hair and calculating blue eyes. But I think we're overdue for a conversation, don't you? Harry gestured for her to enter, his face revealing nothing of the turbulent emotions her presence stirred. Veronica, this is unexpected. She closed the door behind her and took a seat without being invited, crossing her legs elegantly. She wore an expensive designer suit that Harry recognized, one of the many purchases that had contributed to his financial ruin. Quite the Phoenix act you've pulled off, she observed, glancing around his office appreciatively. CFO of the company that now essentially controls Preston. Very impressive. What do you want, Veronica? Harry asked directly. She smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. Clarity. Dexter is convinced you're orchestrating some elaborate revenge scheme. I told him that's giving you too much credit. Her gaze sharpened. But here you are, systematically dismantling the merger he spent a year building, turning my company into a subsidiary of yours, and apparently courting my father, of all people. Harry kept his expression neutral. Business decisions, nothing more. Your connection to Preston is irrelevant. Bullshit, she said flatly. This is personal, and we both know it. Does it matter? Harry countered. The results are the same, either way. Veronica leaned forward slightly. It matters to me. I want to know if I should be worried about my position at Preston. And there it was, the real reason for her visit. Not confrontation or reconciliation, but self-preservation. Typical Veronica, always looking out for number one. Your position at Preston is secure, Harry told her. Creative talent is valuable, regardless of personal history. She studied him, skepticism evident. Just like that, no payback for what happened between us. Harry met her gaze steadily. What happened between us is in the past. I moved on. To destroying Dexter instead, she pressed. I'm building Nexus, Harry corrected her. If that creates challenges for Dexter, that's unfortunate, but not my primary concern. Veronica's laugh was brittle. You never could lie convincingly, Harry. Not to me. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Whatever you're planning, just remember that Dexter isn't as easy to outmaneuver as you might think. He's got powerful allies. So do I, Harry replied simply. A flash of something, uncertainty, perhaps even fear, crossed her face before she mastered it. I see that. My father, for instance. That was a surprise. Life is full of them. She moved toward the door, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I didn't plan for things to end the way they did between us. The debt, that got out of hand. Harry felt a surge of anger, but kept it from his voice. $80,000 on credit cards in my name didn't get out of hand. Veronica, neither did the second mortgage you forged my signature on. Those were deliberate choices. She had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. I was unhappy. You were never there. Dexter was. And now I'm here, Harry said softly. And you're there. Funny how things work out. After she left, Harry sat motionless for several minutes, processing the encounter. Seeing her had been harder than he'd anticipated, stirring up emotions he thought he'd mastered. Anger, betrayal, and beneath it all, a lingering sadness for what might have been. But the encounter had also revealed something crucial. Veronica was worried. Whatever confidence she projected, she sensed the shifting tides and had come to gauge the threat level. That meant Dexter, too, felt the pressure. Good. It was time to increase it. Harry picked up his phone and dialed Josephine Alvarez's extension. I need to call an emergency board meeting, he told her without preamble. Tomorrow morning, if possible. What's happened? She asked, alarmed. Nothing yet, Harry replied. But it's time to discuss the Meridian opportunity. The following morning, in Nexus's boardroom, Harry laid out his most audacious proposal yet. A reverse takeover of Meridian Financial, structured as a merger, but with Nexus management taking control of the combined entity. Their market position is vulnerable, he explained to the stunned board members. Their last 2 quarters have underperformed. Their Chicago-based leadership is distracted by internal politics. With Warren Blackwell's fund backing us and our current market momentum, we can make a compelling offer to their shareholders. Bradley Price, who had remained silent during Harry's presentation, finally spoke. This is a radical departure from our technology focus, Harrison. Meridian is a financial services company. A financial services company with a substantial technology infrastructure that complements ours, Harry countered. And their client portfolio opens doors we've been trying to enter for years. The debate raged for hours, with Harry addressing each concern, presenting financial models that showed the potential upside. By lunchtime, he had persuaded a majority of the board to support at least exploring the possibility. Preliminary approaches only, Price cautioned. No commitments until we've done exhaustive due diligence. Harry agreed readily, knowing that even rumors of Nexus approaching Meridian would send shockwaves through Chicago's business community and create exactly the kind of pressure he wanted Dexter to feel. Sure enough, by the following week, when carefully planted industry rumors began circulating about Nexus's interest in Meridian, Dexter's reaction was swift and predictable. He launched a counteroffensive, publicly dismissing the possibility and privately working to shore up his position within Meridian. But Harry had anticipated this. Through Warren's connections on Meridian's board, he knew exactly which directors were dissatisfied with Dexter's leadership. He cultivated these relationships carefully, providing information that further undermined confidence in Dexter's strategic vision. The confrontation was no longer happening on a personal level, but playing out across the financial pages of Chicago and New York newspapers, in boardrooms and investor calls. It was business as blood sport, with billions of dollars and hundreds of careers in the balance. And at the center of the storm stood Harrison Kincaid, no longer the betrayed husband seeking petty revenge, but the architect of a business coup that would either elevate him to new heights of power or destroy what he had built in Denver. As May turned to June, the rumors solidified into formal discussions. Nexus officially approached Meridian's board with a merger proposal that would value Meridian at a modest premium to its current stock price, but restructure leadership with Harry as CEO of the combined entity. The board, increasingly dissatisfied with Meridian's performance under Dexter's leadership team, agreed to formal negotiations. When the news broke publicly, Meridian stock jumped 8%, while Nexus's climbed 12%, a clear market endorsement of the potential combination. Dexter, fighting for his professional life, called an emergency press conference in Chicago to denounce the proposal as hostile and destructive to Meridian's core values. But financial analysts noted that his arguments lacked specific objections to the financial terms, because the terms were objectively favorable to Meridian shareholders. Behind the scenes, Dexter worked frantically to find an alternative buyer for Meridian, a white knight to save him from Harry's advance. But the business community had sensed blood in the water, and few were willing to challenge Nexus's momentum or Warren Blackwell's financial backing. In Denver, Harry maintained a punishing work schedule, dividing his time between running Nexus's day-to-day operations and orchestrating the Meridian takeover strategy. Zoe Chun, now fully aware of the high-stakes game they were playing, proved invaluable in managing the operational details Harry couldn't personally oversee. You know, she remarked one late night as they reviewed acquisition models. When you first started pushing us toward these aggressive moves, I thought you were just ambitious. Now I'm starting to think it's personal. Harry looked up from his computer, meeting her direct gaze. Does it matter? It might, Zoe replied thoughtfully. Ambition has limits. Personal vendettas sometimes don't. It was an echo of Veronica's accusation, and it gave Harry pause. Was he pushing too hard, taking too many risks in pursuit of his vendetta? Had the line between strategic business moves and personal revenge blurred beyond recognition? Before he could formulate a response, his phone rang, Bradley Price's private number. Harrison, Price said without preamble when Harry answered. Dexter Calloway is here in Denver. He's requesting a private meeting with you tomorrow morning. Harry felt a jolt of surprise. Dexter coming to him, on his territory? That was unexpected. Did he say what about? No, but he mentioned it was a personal matter that might impact the pending business discussions. Harry's mind raced through possibilities. A threat? A bribe? Some new attempt to undermine the merger? I'll meet with him, Harry decided. But I want you and legal counsel standing by. After ending the call, he looked back at Zoe, who had heard enough to understand the situation. Careful, she warned. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous. Harry nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her caution. I know Dexter. He always keeps an ace up his sleeve for emergencies. Whatever he's bringing tomorrow, it won't be a white flag. That night, in his apartment, Harry reviewed the complete history of his interactions with Dexter, searching for vulnerabilities he might have missed, counter-moves he hadn't anticipated. The stakes had never been higher, not just for his revenge plans, but for Nexus itself, which was now fully committed to the Meridian acquisition. Whatever Dexter Calloway planned to throw at him tomorrow, Harrison Kincaid needed to be ready. Chapter 6, The Revelation. The Denver morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect blue sky day that had drawn so many transplants to Colorado. Harry arrived at Nexus headquarters at 6:30, well before the scheduled 8 o'clock meeting with Dexter. He wanted time to center himself, to prepare for whatever was coming. At precisely 8, his assistant announced Dexter's arrival. Harry took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and gave the instruction to send him in. Dexter Calloway looked both familiar and strange as he entered Harry's office. The same tall frame and confident bearing, but with new lines of strain around his eyes and mouth. His tailored suit couldn't quite disguise that he'd lost weight, and the smile he offered Harry seemed forced. "Harrison," he greeted, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Harry shook the offered hand briefly, gesturing Dexter to a seat. "I was surprised by your request. What brings you to Denver, Dexter?" Dexter settled into the chair, his gaze taking in Harry's office. The tasteful art, the spectacular mountain view, the subtle displays of Nexus's recent successes. "Impressive operation you've built here," he commented. "A far cry from the broken man who left Chicago last year." Harry said nothing, waiting. After a moment, Dexter sighed. "I'll get to the point. This merger you're pursuing, it needs to stop. That's why you flew to Denver? To make demands." Harry raised an eyebrow. "The merger discussions are proceeding with the full support of both boards. Your opposition has been noted and dismissed." "It's not a demand," Dexter clarified. "It's a warning. There are aspects to this situation you're not aware of." Harry leaned back slightly in his chair. "Such as?" Dexter reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "In your quest to bring down Meridian, to bring down me, you've overlooked some crucial details about the interplay between Meridian, Preston, and certain investment entities." He placed the folder on Harry's desk and opened it to reveal financial documents, transaction records, investment flows, corporate registrations. "What am I looking at?" Harry asked, though he had already spotted Warren Blackwell's name on several of the documents. "Warren Blackwell isn't just backing your play against Meridian," Dexter explained. "He's been secretly acquiring Meridian debt for the past 6 months through various shell companies. If this merger goes through as structured, he'll effectively control nearly 30% of the combined entity, more than any other single investor." Harry kept his expression carefully neutral. This wasn't entirely news to him. Warren had mentioned increasing his position in Meridian, though not to this extent. "And why would that concern me?" he asked. "Warren has been a supportive investor in Nexus." Dexter laughed without humor. "Come on, Harry. You're smarter than that. Warren Blackwell isn't backing you out of kindness or belief in your business acumen. He's using you to settle old scores with me, with his daughter, with Meridian's board that rejected his advice years ago." Harry remained silent, allowing Dexter to continue. "Once he has control, do you really think he'll keep you as CEO? You're a means to an end. The moment the merger is complete, you'll find yourself sidelined, just another executive who served his purpose." It was a possibility Harry had considered. Warren Blackwell was not known for sentimentality in business matters. But Harry had his own countermeasures in place, protections built into his contract and the merger terms, alliances with other board members. "That's speculation," Harry said dismissively, "and hardly a compelling reason to halt a transaction that benefits both companies' shareholders." Dexter leaned forward, his expression intense. "There's more. Warren isn't just acquiring debt. He's been secretly meeting with Preston Media's largest clients, including Luminous Brands. He's positioning himself to control both their marketing agency and their financial services provider after the merger." This was news and potentially concerning. If Warren was making independent moves with Preston's clients, it could complicate the delicate balance of relationships Harry had been cultivating. "Again," Harry said, keeping his voice even, "business strategy, not a reason to halt the merger." "It's not strategy, it's manipulation," Dexter insisted. "And it doesn't end there." He pulled another document from the folder. "This is a transcript of a conversation between Warren and Martin Chambers from 2 weeks ago. Notice the highlighted portion." Harry skimmed the document, his eyes catching on Warren's words. "Once the merger is complete and Harrison has served his purpose, we'll restructure both entities. Preston remains intact under your leadership, but Meridian and Nexus will be stripped for their valuable components and the remains sold off. Calloway and my daughter will be collateral damage, but that's been the plan all along." A chill ran through Harry. The transcript seemed authentic, but it could easily be fabricated. This was exactly the kind of desperate move he'd expected from Dexter. "Where did you get this?" Harry asked, his tone hardening. "I have my sources," Dexter replied vaguely. "The point is, you think you're the chess master in this game, but you're actually a pawn. Warren is using your desire for revenge against me to advance his own agenda." Harry studied Dexter carefully. The man looked genuinely concerned, but Harry had seen him perform convincingly before, in boardrooms, with clients, and most memorably, as a supposed best friend for years while sleeping with his wife. "Let's say, for argument's sake, that this transcript is authentic," Harry said slowly. "Why come to me? Why not take this to the Meridian board or the financial press?" Dexter hesitated. "Because despite everything, we were friends once. And because I know this isn't really about business for you. It's about what happened with Veronica." At the mention of her name, Harry felt the old anger stir. "Don't. We need to talk about it," Dexter insisted. "What happened? It wasn't what you think." Harry's laugh was cold. "I found you in my bed with my wife. I think that's pretty unambiguous." "The affair was real," Dexter acknowledged. "I won't deny that or try to justify it. It was wrong, and I'm sorry for the pain it caused you. But the financial disaster that followed, that wasn't what either of us intended." "No." Harry's voice was dangerously quiet. "The $180,000 in debt, the forged documents, the vicious divorce that left me financially ruined while you got a promotion and my wife, that was all just an unfortunate accident." Dexter looked genuinely uncomfortable. "The debt was real, but it wasn't about hurting you. Veronica has problems. Shopping addiction, mainly. It started small, a few credit cards, some online purchases. By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, she was in deep. The forged mortgage was her idea, a desperate attempt to cover the debts before you found out." Harry stared at him in disbelief. "You expect me to believe you didn't know? That you weren't complicit?" "I knew about some of it," Dexter admitted. "Not the full extent. When you discovered everything after finding us together, it spiraled out of control. Veronica panicked, hired Annette Sawyer, and went for the scorched earth approach." Harry's mind was racing, reassessing events in light of this new information. Could it be true? Veronica had always been impulsive with money, even early in their marriage. And there had been times when purchases would appear, beautiful clothes or artwork she couldn't quite explain within their budget. "Even if what you're saying is true," Harry said finally, "it doesn't change what happened. You betrayed me, both of you. The financial devastation just added insult to injury." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Dexter replied. "God knows I don't deserve it. I'm asking you to consider whether this path you're on, this alliance with Warren Blackwell, this all-consuming quest to destroy Meridian, is really about justice or just about pain." A heavy silence fell between them. Harry found himself in the disorienting position of considering Dexter's words. The transcript, if authentic, suggested Warren had his own agenda that might ultimately harm Nexus as much as Meridian. And the revelation about Veronica's financial issues, while not excusing the betrayal, cast it in a slightly different light. "Why should I believe any of this?" Harry asked finally. "Why should I trust you now, after everything?" Dexter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, placing it on the desk beside the folder. "This contains additional evidence. Bank records showing the progression of Veronica's spending, emails between us when I discovered how bad it had gotten, and more recent communications that corroborate the transcript." He stood, straightening his jacket. "I'm staying at the Brown Palace tonight. Review the materials. If you want to talk further, you know where to find me." As Dexter turned to leave, Harry called after him. "If Warren is playing both sides as you claim, why hasn't he eliminated you from Meridian yet? He certainly has the influence." Dexter paused at the door. "Because I'm useful to him while this merger is pending. I'm the villain in the story, the incompetent executive that justifies Nexus's takeover." His smile was bitter. "Once the deal closes, I'll be the first casualty. You, I suspect, will be the second." After Dexter left, Harry sat motionless, staring at the folder and USB drive on his desk. His mind was in turmoil, years of certainty about what had happened and who was responsible suddenly thrown into question. He picked up his phone and dialed Zoe Chen's extension. "I need you to clear my schedule for the day." And find me everything we have on Warren Blackwell's recent investments, particularly any connections to Preston Media's clients. Next, he called Phoebe Winters in Chicago. Though they spoke less frequently now that Harry was established in Denver, she remained someone he trusted implicitly. "I need a favor," he told her when she answered. "Confidentially, I need you to verify some financial records related to my ex-wife. And I need it yesterday." For the rest of the day, Harry holed up in his office, reviewing the materials Dexter had provided and cross-referencing them with information from his own sources. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Warren Blackwell, it seemed, had indeed been making moves far more extensive than he disclosed to Harry. The transcript's authenticity couldn't be confirmed, but financial records showed patterns consistent with the strategy outlined in it. Most concerning was evidence that Warren had recently established a private equity fund specifically designed to acquire distressed assets. Exactly the position Meridian and Nexus might find themselves in if the merger went badly. Late that evening, his phone rang with a call from Phoebe. "I can't give you details without violating privilege," she said without preamble. "But I can tell you that Veronica was in treatment for compulsive spending for several months last year. The timeline matches what you asked me to check." Harry thanked her and hung up, his world tilting further. If Veronica had been in treatment, it lent credibility to Dexter's claim that her financial misconduct stemmed from addiction rather than malice. It didn't excuse the betrayal, but it complicated the narrative he'd built in his mind. As midnight approached, Harry found himself doing something he never expected, dialing Dexter's hotel room. "We need to talk," he said when Dexter answered. "Not about the past, but about Warren Blackwell and what he's really planning." The next morning found an unlikely alliance forming in Harry's office. Himself and Dexter Calloway, once friends, then bitter enemies, now cautiously united against a common threat. They were joined by Zoe Chun, whose data analysis skills would be crucial, and Bradley Price, whose stake in Nexus's future demanded his involvement. "If what we suspect is true," Harry explained to Price, "Warren isn't interested in a successful merger. He wants to engineer a situation where both companies become vulnerable, then swoop in to acquire the most valuable parts at fire sale prices." Price, looking troubled, studied the evidence they'd assembled. "This is disturbing, but not entirely surprising. Warren has a history of similar plays. The question is, what do we do about it? The merger process is well underway. Shareholders are expecting it. We don't stop the merger," Harry said firmly. "We reshape it. Warren's strategy depends on control through debt and influence over key clients. We need to neutralize both." Over the next several hours, they developed a counter-strategy. Instead of the original merger structure, they would propose a new arrangement, a holding company that would own both Meridian and Nexus while maintaining their operational independence. The structure would include provisions that prevented asset stripping and required supermajority approval for any significant restructuring. "It limits everyone's options, including ours," Dexter observed. "But it also blocks Warren's play." Harry nodded. "And we address the client issue by accelerating our integration of Preston Media's systems with Nexus. If we make ourselves indispensable to their operations before Warren can move on their clients, we create another barrier." The plan was bold and fraught with risks. It required convincing both boards to accept a significant revision to the merger terms and doing so without explicitly accusing Warren Blackwell of duplicity, an accusation that, without definitive proof, could backfire catastrophically. As the strategy session concluded, Price and Zoe left to begin the necessary preparations, leaving Harry and Dexter alone for the first time since their confrontation the previous day. An awkward silence fell between them. "We're not friends again," Harry said finally, his voice firm. "Working together against Warren doesn't erase what happened." Dexter nodded slowly. "I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. But for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for the affair, but for everything that followed. For not stopping Veronica from going nuclear in the divorce. For the rumors I spread afterward." Harry studied the man who had once been his closest friend, seeing both the familiar face and the stranger he had become. "Why did you do it?" he asked, the question that had haunted him for over a year. Was it just about Veronica? Dexter looked away, seemingly gathering his thoughts. It started that way. An attraction, forbidden and therefore more potent. But underneath, I was jealous, Harry. You had everything, the natural talent, the respect of the firm, the perfect life. I convinced myself you didn't appreciate it, that you were taking it all for granted. He laughed bitterly. Classic rationalization for betrayal, right? But once it started, I couldn't stop. And then when everything fell apart, I told myself I was just picking up the pieces, that since your life was already ruined, I might as well benefit from it. The honesty was unexpected and, in its way, more painful than the betrayal itself. Harry had built Dexter into a calculating villain in his mind. The reality, a weak man driven by envy and opportunity, was somehow more devastating. I need to know one more thing, Harry said. Veronica, do you love her? Dexter looked genuinely startled by the question. After a long pause, he shook his head. No, I thought I did, or at least I told myself that to justify what we were doing. But no, I think we were using each other. Me to get what you had, her to escape what she'd become. Harry nodded, absorbing this final piece of information. She'll be collateral damage in this countermove against Warren. Her position at Preston will likely become untenable once the truth about him comes out. I know, Dexter acknowledged. She's already on thin ice there. The spending issues affected her work performance. Martin Chambers has been looking for a reason to let her go. The revelation should have brought satisfaction. Veronica facing consequences for her actions. Instead, Harry felt a complex mixture of emotions. Residual anger, yes, but also an unexpected pang of concern for the woman he had once loved above all others. I'll make sure she lands on her feet, Dexter said, as if reading Harry's thoughts. Whatever happens between us, I owe her that much. Harry said nothing, turning to gaze out at the Denver skyline. The revenge he had planned for so long was transforming before his eyes into something different. Not abandonment of justice, but a more complex reckoning that acknowledged the human frailties behind the betrayal. The next 2 weeks were a blur of strategic meetings, legal consultations, and careful coalition building within both companies' boards. Harry and Dexter, working in uneasy alliance, navigated the treacherous waters of corporate politics, gradually bringing key stakeholders to support their revised merger structure. Warren Blackwell, sensing the shift but not yet understanding its full implications, requested an urgent meeting with Harry. You've altered the merger terms, he said without preamble when they met in Harry's office. Why? Harry had prepared carefully for this confrontation. Market conditions changed. The original structure created vulnerabilities we couldn't accept. Warren's eyes narrowed. Vulnerabilities for whom? Exactly? For both companies, Harry replied evenly. The new holding company structure preserves value for all shareholders while allowing for more gradual integration. It also severely limits asset restructuring, Warren observed, his tone hardening. A curious priority. Harry met his gaze steadily. Not curious at all. Both boards want to ensure the combined entity remains stable through the transition. Standard corporate governance. Warren studied him, calculation evident in his expression. Callaway visited you last week. Suddenly you're revising merger terms that were nearly finalized. I'm not a fool, Harrison. No one suggested you were, Harry replied calmly. The revisions benefit all shareholders, including your fund. Unless, of course, your investment thesis depends on something other than the merged company's success. The implied accusation hung in the air between them. Warren's expression didn't change, but a dangerous light appeared in his eyes. You disappoint me, he said finally. I thought you understood what was at stake here, personally as well as professionally. I understand perfectly, Harry assured him. Better than you might think. Warren stood, straightening his impeccable suit. You've made a serious miscalculation. This isn't over. After he left, Harry immediately called Dexter at Meridian. Warren knows. He didn't admit anything, but he's clearly unhappy with the revised terms. Will he fight us? Dexter asked. Count on it, Harry replied grimly. Make sure the security provisions we discussed are in place for the Meridian systems. And warn Chambers at Preston that Warren may approach him directly. The stage was set for the final confrontation, not the revenge scenario Harry had originally envisioned, but something potentially more satisfying. The exposure and defeat of Warren Blackwell's predatory scheme, with both Nexus and Meridian emerging stronger for the alliance forged in crisis. As June drew to a close, the revised merger received preliminary approval from both boards, setting the stage for shareholder votes in August. The financial press hailed the unusual structure as innovative, particularly the governance provisions that protected the operational integrity of both companies. What none of the analysts yet recognized was that beneath the surface, a battle for control was raging, one that would determine not just the fate of the merger, but the professional futures of everyone involved. Harry, standing at the center of the storm he had helped create, found himself in an unexpected position, fighting not for revenge, but for redemption, not just for himself, but for the companies and people whose lives had become entwined with his quest for justice. The final act was about to begin, and its conclusion would surprise everyone involved. Chapter 7. The Counterattack. July in Denver brought sweltering heat and the calm before the storm. With the shareholder votes on the revised merger structure just weeks away, Harry maintained a punishing schedule, dividing his time between running Nexus's day-to-day operations and shoring up support for the deal. Warren Blackwell had gone ominously quiet since their confrontation, making no public moves against the revised merger terms. But Harry wasn't fooled by the silence. Warren was a patient predator, and his counterattack, when it came, would be calculated for maximum impact. Still nothing from the Blackwell camp? Zoe asked one evening as they reviewed the latest shareholder sentiment analysis. Harry shook his head. Nothing overt. His fund representatives on both boards have been asking technical questions about the governance provisions, but that's standard due diligence. Too quiet, Zoe muttered. He's planning something. Harry was inclined to agree. Warren hadn't built his fortune by accepting defeat, especially not at the hands of his former son-in-law and a man he considered a traitor to his daughter. The first hint of Warren's strategy came 3 days later when Harry received an urgent call from Martin Chambers at Presta Media. "We've got a situation," Chambers said, his voice tight with stress. Luminous Brands is threatening to pull their business. Their CEO says they've received an interesting proposal from a new marketing tech consortium that can better serve their needs. Harry felt a chill despite the summer heat. "Let me guess, the consortium is backed by Warren Blackwell's fund." "How did you know?" Chambers sounded surprised. "Because it's the move I would make in his position," Harry replied grimly. "He's trying to undermine the value proposition of the merger by attacking our client relationships." After reassuring Chambers and outlining a counter-strategy for retaining Luminous Brands, Harry called an emergency meeting with his crisis team. Zoe, Bradley Price, and via secure video link from Chicago, Dexter Calloway. "Warren's making his move," Harry explained. "He's targeting key clients, starting with Luminous Brands at Preston. We need to assume he'll go after Meridian's major accounts next." "Classic destabilization strategy," Dexter observed. "If enough major clients get nervous about the merger, shareholders will lose confidence in the projected revenue models and vote against the deal." Price finished, looking troubled. "Or demand revisions that would remove the protections we've built in." "Exactly," Harry confirmed. "We need to get ahead of this." "Zoe, I want a complete vulnerability assessment. Which clients are most at risk? What unique value propositions can we emphasize to keep them on board?" As Zoe nodded and began taking notes, Harry turned to Dexter. "You need to personally reach out to Meridian's top 20 clients. Reassure them that the merger will enhance services, not disrupt them. Offer fee guarantees if necessary." The team sprang into action, implementing a comprehensive client retention strategy that combined reassurance, incentives, and accelerated delivery of previously promised innovations. Harry personally joined calls with several key accounts, leveraging his financial expertise to demonstrate how the merged entity would better serve their needs. But Warren's attack wasn't limited to client relationships. 3 days after the Luminous Brand situation, a concerning story appeared in the Financial Times, quoting sources close to the merger discussions, who raised questions about the financial projections underlying the deal. These calculations assume cost synergies that may be unrealistic given the company's different operational models, the anonymous source claimed. The governance structure, while innovative, introduces inefficiencies that could significantly reduce shareholder value. The article, while carefully couched in speculation, had Warren's fingerprints all over it. The timing was deliberate, late enough in the process to sow doubt, but early enough to allow the uncertainty to spread before the shareholder votes. Harry's phone rang shortly after the article appeared online. It was Phoebe Winters from Chicago. "Have you seen it?" she asked without preamble. "The Financial Times piece?" "Yes." Warren's opening salvo. "It's more than that," Phoebe replied. "I've heard rumors that certain influential Meridian shareholders received detailed analysis packages yesterday, supposedly independent assessments that question the merger's value." Harry cursed softly. Warren was attacking on multiple fronts, targeting not just clients, but shareholders directly. "Can you give me copies of these packages?" "Working on it," Phoebe assured him. "But there's something else. Veronica called me this morning." That caught Harry by surprise. "Veronica? Why would she call you?" "Because she's scared," Phoebe said bluntly. Apparently, her father paid her a visit last night. He offered to help her financially, clear all her debts, set up a trust fund, on one condition. "Let me guess," Harry said grimly, "that she publicly opposed the merger. Worse, he wants her to make public statements about your mental state during the divorce. Claims of erratic behavior, vengeful tendencies, financial irresponsibility. Anything to paint you as unstable and unreliable." The calculated cruelty of it took Harry's breath away. Warren was willing to use his own daughter as a weapon, exploiting both her financial vulnerability and her complicated history with Harry to derail the merger. "What did she say?" Harry asked, surprised to find himself concerned about Veronica's response. "She refused," Phoebe replied, a note of reluctant admiration in her voice. "Said she'd done enough damage already and wouldn't be part of her father's schemes. That's when she called me. Want to know if you were aware of what Warren was planning." Harry processed this unexpected development. Veronica, despite everything, had drawn a line. It didn't erase the past, but it suggested a complexity to her character that he had forgotten in his focus on revenge. "Tell her." He hesitated, unsure what message to send to the woman who had once been the center of his world, and then the architect of its destruction. "Tell her I appreciate the warning, and that she should be careful. Warren won't take her refusal well." After ending the call, Harry sat for a long moment, recalibrating his understanding of the situation. Warren was proving even more ruthless than anticipated, willing to sacrifice his own daughter in his quest for control. It suggested a desperation that was both concerning and potentially useful. The next blow came that afternoon in the form of a letter from the SEC, informing Nexus that they had received a whistleblower complaint alleging accounting irregularities in the company's recent quarterly reports. The letter was preliminary, simply notifying Nexus of the investigation rather than making specific accusations, but the timing left little doubt about its origin. "This is a classic delaying tactic," Bradley Price fumed when Harry showed him the letter. "Even if the investigation finds nothing, which it won't, because there's nothing to find, it creates uncertainty that could push the shareholder votes past the critical window." Harry nodded grimly. The merger agreement included a termination clause if the deal wasn't closed by October 1st. Warren was trying to run out the clock. "We need a counterpunch," Harry decided. "Not just defend against these attacks, but go on the offensive." That evening, Harry convened a war council in his apartment, away from potential corporate eavesdroppers. Zoe Chun, Bradley Price, and Dexter Calloway, who had flown in from Chicago, gathered around Harry's dining table, along with Phoebe Winters and, surprisingly, Calvin Reeves from Preston Media's IT department. "Warren's strategy is clear," Harry began. "Attack client relationships, undermine shareholder confidence, create regulatory delays, and potentially use Veronica to question my fitness to lead the merged entity. Classic siege warfare," Dexter observed. "Cut off supplies, isolate the target, then wait for surrender." "Exactly," Harry agreed. And our defense so far has been reactive, shoring up client relationships, reassuring shareholders, cooperating with the SEC investigation. But that's not enough. We need to change the dynamics of this conflict. How? Price asked. Warren has massive resources and decades of business connections. He's playing a game he's mastered over 40 years. By changing the rules, Harry replied, a cold determination in his voice. Warren's strategy depends on time and information asymmetry. He moves in the shadows, using proxies and cutouts to distance himself from the attacks. We need to drag him into the light. Over the next several hours, they developed a counter-strategy as bold as it was risky. Instead of continuing to fight a defensive battle on multiple fronts, they would concentrate their resources on a single, decisive thrust, exposing Warren's true agenda and the methods he was employing to advance it. Calvin Reeves, the IT specialist who had been Harry's inside man at Preston, would be crucial to the plan. Through his position, he had access to digital communications that could prove Warren's direct involvement in the attacks on the merger. It's legally gray, Phoebe warned. Using internal communications this way could violate privacy laws. We won't use anything that wouldn't be discoverable in litigation, Harry assured her. We just need enough evidence to establish the pattern. The second component of the plan involved Warren's business history. Zoe had been researching his past deals, identifying a pattern of similar maneuvers, apparently supportive investments that turned predatory when companies became vulnerable. 3 companies in particular show the template, she explained, displaying her findings on Harry's laptop. In each case, Warren's fund initially supported a merger or acquisition, then exploited governance weaknesses to force asset sales that benefited his fund at the expense of other shareholders. We package this history with whatever Calvin can provide about the current situation, Harry continued, and present it directly to the boards of both companies simultaneously. Not as an attack on Warren, but as a risk assessment that requires immediate action. The final element of a strategy was the most audacious and the most personally difficult for Harry. It would require him to reach out to Veronica directly, not to reconcile, but to request her cooperation in exposing her father's methods. Are you sure about that part? Dexter asked, clearly uncomfortable. Involving Veronica adds a personal dimension that could backfire. Warren already made it personal when he approached her, Harry replied firmly. And her testimony about his offer would be powerful evidence of his true intentions. As the others left to begin implementing their roles in the plan, Dexter lingered behind. For what it's worth, he said awkwardly, I think Veronica might actually help. She's been different since the divorce. The therapy for her spending issues seems to have forced her to confront other behaviors too. Harry studied his former friend, still not entirely comfortable with their uneasy alliance. Why are you telling me this? Dexter shrugged. Because despite everything, I think you still care what happens to her. And because if we're betting our professional futures on her cooperation, you should know it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. After Dexter left, Harry stood at his apartment windows, looking out at the Denver night. The city lights sparkled against the darkness, reminding him of that rain-slicked Chicago evening over a year ago when he'd stared out different windows, contemplating the ruins of his life. He had come so far since then, rebuilt his career, created new relationships, discovered strengths he hadn't known he possessed. Yet here he was, about to reach back into the past he'd tried to escape, asking for help from the woman who had betrayed him so completely. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed Veronica's number. Harry. Her voice was cautious when she answered. I didn't expect to hear from you directly. We need to talk, he said simply, about your father and what he's trying to do. The conversation that followed was unlike any they'd had in years. Direct, honest, stripped of the emotional manipulation that had characterized their final months together. Veronica confirmed what Phoebe had reported about Warren's visit and filled in disturbing details about his broader plans. He doesn't just want to control the merged company, she explained. He wants to dismantle it. He specifically mentioned that Nexus's technology division would be sold to a Singapore firm he's partnered with, and Meridian's client portfolios would be absorbed by his other financial interests. And Presta Media? Harry asked. Liquidated, Veronica replied grimly. He considers it damaged goods after the luminous brands reporting irregularities. Only the client relationships have value to him. The callousness of it was breathtaking. Warren would destroy 3 companies and thousands of careers to expand his already substantial fortune. I need your help, Harry said finally. Your testimony about his approach to you could be crucial in exposing his real agenda to the boards. A long silence followed. You're asking a lot, Veronica said eventually. He's still my father, despite everything. I know, Harry acknowledged. And I wouldn't ask if there were another way. But there are 15,000 jobs across these companies at stake. Whatever happened between us, I don't think you want that kind of collateral damage on your conscience. Another pause, longer this time. I'll help, she said finally. Not for you, not even for me, but because it's the right thing to do. For once in my life, I want to clean up a mess instead of creating one. The next morning, Harry's counteroffensive began in earnest. While Zoe and her team compiled the dossier on Warren's business history, Calvin Reeves used his access at Preston Media to gather evidence of Warren's direct involvement in the attacks on the merger. By mid-afternoon, they had accumulated a compelling case. Emails showing Warren's representatives coordinating with the concerned shareholders who had received the negative analysis packages, financial transfers linking his fund to the marketing consortium approaching luminous brands, and a damning message from Warren himself to a board member discussing the SEC complaint as a strategic delaying tactic. Harry reviewed the material with Phoebe, who had flown in from Chicago to provide legal oversight. Will it be enough, he asked, to prove criminal wrongdoing? Probably not. To convince the boards that Warren represents an existential threat to the merger and their companies? Absolutely. With the dossier complete, Harry scheduled emergency board meetings for both Nexus and Meridian the following morning. To ensure Warren couldn't mobilize his allies in advance, the agenda was listed simply as Merger Risk Assessment Update. That evening, as the final preparations were underway, Harry received an unexpected visitor at his apartment, Veronica. I could have sent a written statement, she said as he let her in, her discomfort evident. But some things need to be said in person. She looked both familiar and strange, standing in his living room. The same striking features he had once known better than his own, but somehow altered by the events of the past year. She seemed thinner, less polished than he remembered, but also more present, more authentic. I've prepared my statement about my father's approach, she said, handing him a document. It's comprehensive, and I'm willing to answer questions from the boards if needed. Thank you, Harry replied, genuinely appreciative. This will help significantly. An awkward silence fell between them, the weight of their shared history filling the space. I owe you an apology, Veronica said suddenly. Not just for the affair, but for what came after. The credit cards, the mortgage, the vicious divorce. I was out of control. Harry studied her, searching for the manipulation he'd come to expect, but finding instead what appeared to be genuine remorse. Why? He asked simply. It was the question that had haunted him for over a year. Veronica looked away, gathering her thoughts. The easy answer is the spending addiction. It's real. I've been in treatment, and it helped me understand how my brain works when it comes to money and purchases. But that's just the mechanism, not the why. She moved to the window, gazing out at the same Denver vista Harry had contemplated the night before. The truth is, I was drowning. In expectations, in appearances, in a life we'd built that never quite felt like mine. You were so focused on providing everything, on being the success story, that I became a supporting character in my own life. Harry felt a flicker of defensiveness, but kept silent, letting her continue. Dexter noticed me when you stopped seeing me, she said softly. The affair wasn't about love, or even primarily about sex. It was about being seen, being the center of someone's attention again. The spending served the same purpose. Each purchase was a momentary feeling of control, of choice. She turned back to face him. None of that excuses what I did. The betrayal, the financial destruction, those were my choices, my failures. I told myself you deserved it, because you'd neglected me, but that was just justification for behavior I couldn't otherwise live with. Harry absorbed her words, finding in them a truth he hadn't been ready to hear until now. Their marriage had been broken long before he found her with Dexter. Broken partly by his absence, his prioritization of career over connection, his assumption that providing was the same as partnering. "I appreciate the apology," he said finally. "And there's truth in what you say about my role in the breakdown of our marriage. But the choices you made afterward." He shook his head. "Those nearly destroyed me." "I know," she acknowledged quietly. "And yet here you are, rebuilding something impressive from the ashes. Maybe that's the silver lining in all this mess. We're both finally becoming the people we should have been all along." As she prepared to leave, Veronica paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I hope you win tomorrow. Not just because my father deserves to be stopped, but because you've earned this second chance." After she left, Harry found himself in a reflective mood, the anger that had driven him for so long partially displaced by a complicated mixture of emotions. Lingering hurt, yes, but also a strange sense of closure, and beneath it all, the first tentative shoots of something that might eventually become forgiveness. The morning brought clarity and purpose. Harry arrived at Nexus headquarters early, reviewing the presentation one final time before the board meeting. Zoe, Bradley Price, and Phoebe Winters joined him for a last strategy session. Warren will be attending via video link, Price informed them. "He's in New York today. That could work to our advantage. Harder for him to control the room remotely. Or it could give him plausible deniability," Phoebe cautioned. "We need to be prepared for him to claim he's being misrepresented or that his representatives acted without his knowledge." The Nexus board meeting began at 9, with Meridian scheduled for 11 to allow Harry and his team to present to both. As the Nexus directors assembled in the boardroom, Harry noted the careful positioning of Warren's allies, strategically placed to intervene or object as needed. "Good morning," Harry began once everyone was seated. "Today's update concerns significant risks to the pending merger that have recently come to light. These are not operational or financial risks in the conventional sense, but governance and integrity risks that threaten the fundamental value proposition of the transaction." With clinical precision, Harry laid out the evidence they had compiled, Warren's history of similar maneuvers with other companies, the coordinated attacks on client relationships, the manufactured shareholder concerns, and finally, the SEC complaint that appeared timed specifically to delay the merger past its termination date. The room grew increasingly tense as the presentation progressed. Warren's representatives shifted uncomfortably, while other board members looked alarmed at the pattern emerging. When Harry reached the section on Warren's approach to Veronica, he played a recorded statement she had prepared, her voice steady as she described her father's attempt to recruit her into his scheme. Warren, watching via video link, maintained a stony expression throughout, neither confirming nor denying the allegations. But when Harry opened the floor for questions, he finally spoke. "This is a remarkable work of fiction, Mr. Kincaid," he said coolly. "A personal vendetta dressed up as corporate concern. You've selectively presented information to paint a false narrative about legitimate business activities." Harry had anticipated this reaction. "Mr. Blackwell, are you denying that your representatives approached Luminous Brands with an offer to move their business from Preston Media to a consortium backed by your fund?" "Business competition is not a conspiracy," Warren replied smoothly. "Alternative proposals to potential clients happen every day. And the SEC complaint," Harry pressed, "the timing is merely coincidental." "I have no knowledge of any whistleblower complaint," Warren insisted. "Though if one exists, the board should take it seriously rather than assuming it's part of some elaborate plot." Harry nodded to Zoe, who activated the final slide, an email from Warren to one of his fund managers, dated 3 weeks earlier, that explicitly discussed using regulatory delays to push the merger past its termination date. Warren's expression didn't change, but muscle twitched in his jaw. "Where did you obtain that document?" he demanded. "It appears to be fabricated or taken out of context." "It was provided by a source within the regulatory process," Harry replied, the careful wording suggested by Phoebe to avoid revealing Calvin Reeves as the actual source. "And it's been authenticated by independent experts." For the next hour, the board engaged in intense discussion, with Warren's allies attempting to minimize the significance of the evidence, while other directors expressed increasing concern about the pattern it revealed. Harry and his team answered questions, providing additional details that reinforced their central thesis, that Warren Blackwell intended not to support the merger, but to manipulate it for his own benefit at the expense of other shareholders. By the time the meeting concluded, the mood in the room had shifted decisively. The board voted to establish a special committee to review Warren's role in the merger process and to implement additional governance safeguards against the tactics identified in the presentation. The Meridian board meeting that followed produced similar results, with Dexter Calloway skillfully managing the presentation in Harry's absence during the early portions. When Harry arrived to address questions, he found the Meridian directors even more alarmed than their Nexus counterparts, particularly about Warren's apparent intent to dismantle significant portions of both companies after gaining control. By early afternoon, the counteroffensive had achieved its primary objective. Both boards had voted to proceed with the merger as structured, with additional protections against the specific threats Warren posed. More significantly, they had restricted Warren's fund from increasing its position in either company pending completion of the special committee reviews. Warren's immediate response was understated but ominous. "This isn't over," he told Harry in a brief phone call after the Meridian meeting. "You've won a battle, not the war." "There doesn't need to be a war," Harry replied. "The merger as structured benefits all shareholders, including your fund. The only scenario where you lose is if your goal was always to break apart these companies." Warren's laugh was cold. "Always so naive, Harrison. Business isn't about building. It's about extracting maximum value. Sometimes that requires creative destruction." "Not this time," Harry said firmly. "Not these companies." The weeks that followed brought continued skirmishes as Warren tested the new defenses around the merger. He launched a public relations campaign questioning the governance structure, attempted to rally other institutional investors to oppose the deal, and even filed a lawsuit challenging the board's decisions to restrict his fund's activities. But with his true agenda exposed and both companies now fully aligned against him, these efforts gained little traction. By early August, with the shareholder votes approaching, Warren faced a choice: continue a losing battle or salvage what advantage he could from the situation. On a sweltering August afternoon, Harry received an unexpected meeting request from Warren's representatives. The proposed location was neutral ground, a private dining room at a downtown Denver restaurant, and the agenda simply listed merger discussion. After consulting with Bradley Price and Dexter Calloway, Harry agreed to the meeting, curious what Warren might offer at this late stage. Warren Blackwell arrived alone, impeccably dressed despite the summer heat, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expression revealing nothing. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as they sat across from each other at the small table. "I was intrigued by the request," Harry replied neutrally. Warren studied him for a moment. "You played this well, I'll give you that. Better than I anticipated. The personal connection gave you an edge I underestimated." "It wasn't personal," Harry countered. "It was about protecting the companies and the merger." Warren's smile was knowing. "Everything is personal, Harrison. Business, politics, even art, all ultimately expressions of personal will and desire. You wanted to beat me because of Veronica, because of what you perceived as my role in your downfall. And you wanted to break apart 3 companies because—" Harry let the question hang. "Because that's where the maximum value lies," Warren replied simply. "The sum of the parts is worth more than the whole. A basic principle of financial engineering. At the cost of thousands of jobs and years of potential growth." Warren waved a dismissive hand. "Creative destruction. The market reallocates resources more efficiently than sentiment." The fundamental difference in their worldviews could not have been clearer. To Warren, businesses were merely collections of assets to be reconfigured for maximum short-term return. To Harry, they were living entities with potential that extended far beyond the next quarterly report. "I assume you didn't request this meeting to debate business philosophy," Harry said, steering the conversation back to practicalities. "No," Warren acknowledged. "I'm here to propose a compromise. My fund will support the merger as structured, with no further opposition, in exchange for 2 concessions. Harry raised an eyebrow questioningly. First, a guaranteed seat on the holding company's executive committee for my representative, Warren continued. Not me personally. I have no interest in operational involvement, but someone who will ensure our investment is properly considered in strategic decisions. And the second concession? Harry asked, suspecting he knew what was coming. You step aside as CEO of the merged entity, Warren said bluntly. Callaway as well. New leadership, untainted by the recent unpleasantness. Harry had indeed anticipated this demand. Warren couldn't achieve his original goal of dismantling the companies, but he could extract a personal victory by removing Harry from the leadership position he had worked so hard to secure. The boards have already approved the leadership structure, Harry pointed out, with me as CEO and Dexter as president of the Financial Services Division. Boards change their minds when major shareholders express concerns, Warren replied. My fund, combined with aligned investors, represents nearly 25% of the voting shares, enough to create significant disruption if I choose to pursue that path. Harry considered the proposal carefully. Warren was offering a clean end to the conflict, and the executive committee seat was a reasonable compromise that would give his fund influence without control. But the demand for his resignation struck at the heart of everything Harry had built since leaving Chicago. This position, leading the merged entity into a new era of growth and innovation, was the culmination of his professional rebirth. To surrender it now, especially to Warren, would mean allowing his nemesis to claim ultimate victory. I need time to consider this, Harry said finally. Warren nodded, unsurprised. You have 48 hours. After that, I proceed with my alternative strategy, a public campaign against a merger that will, at minimum, delay the shareholder votes past the termination date. After Warren left, Harry immediately called Bradley Price and Dexter Callaway, arranging an emergency meeting at his apartment that evening. It's a power play, pure and simple, Dexter said after Harry outlined Warren's proposal. He can't win the war, so he's trying to salvage a symbolic victory. Symbolic but significant, Price noted. Removing you from leadership was his objective all along, though initially as part of a larger dismantling strategy. Harry paced the length of his living room, weighing options. The question is, how much disruption can he actually cause? Is his threat of delaying the votes past the termination date credible? Potentially, Price acknowledged. With 25% of the votes aligned against the merger and the possibility of legal challenges, he could create enough uncertainty to push some institutional investors to a wait-and-see position, which would effectively kill the deal, Dexter concluded. The termination clause exists for a reason. Too much delay increases execution risk. Harry stopped pacing, his decision crystallizing. I'm not stepping down. We've come too far, built too much, to surrender now. It's a risk, Price warned. Warren isn't bluffing. Neither am I, Harry replied with quiet determination. But we need a counter-strategy, something that neutralizes his remaining leverage without giving him what he wants. For the next several hours, they brainstormed approaches, each seeming to have fatal flaws, until Dexter mentioned an obscure provision in Meridian's corporate bylaws. It's rarely invoked, he explained, but there's a mechanism for significant shareholders to call an emergency shareholder meeting prior to scheduled votes if they can demonstrate potential material harm to the company. Harry's interest was immediately piqued. Could we use that to force an earlier vote on the merger? Possibly, Dexter said thoughtfully. We need to demonstrate that delay itself constitutes material harm, perhaps through client contract renewals that depend on certainty about the merged entity structure. And we'd need significant shareholders to initiate the process, Price added. Like the employee pension fund that owns 8% of Meridian, Harry suggested. The same employees whose jobs would be threatened by Warren's dismantling strategy? A slow smile spread across Dexter's face. That could work. The pension fund trustees are elected by employees. If they understood the threat Warren poses, then we accelerate rather than delay, Harry concluded. Force the vote before Warren can fully mobilize his opposition campaign. The counter-strategy took shape rapidly. While Dexter worked with the Meridian Employee Pension Fund to initiate the emergency shareholder meeting, Harry and Price approached Nexus's institutional investors with concrete evidence of the benefits the merger would deliver and the specific threats Warren's opposition posed to those benefits. They also took one additional step, releasing selected portions of the dossier on Warren's past predatory tactics to financial journalists who had been covering the merger story. Not as a direct attack, but as background information that helped contextualize the current situation. The resulting articles didn't explicitly accuse Warren of wrongdoing, but painted a concerning picture of his investment patterns and raised questions about his true objectives in the current merger situation. Warren's response was swift and furious. "You've made this personal," he growled during a phone call to Harry the morning after the first article appeared. "Our deal is off the table. Now I'll make sure neither you nor Callaway have careers when this is over." "There is never going to be a deal where I stepped aside," Harry replied calmly. "And as for making it personal, you did that when you tried to use your own daughter against me." The next 2 weeks saw an escalation in tactics on both sides. Warren launched his Promise Public campaign against the merger, complete with full-page newspaper ads questioning the financial projections and governance structure. Harry countered with a series of investor presentations that provided transparent, detailed breakdowns of the projected synergies and growth opportunities. The crucial break came when the Meridian Employee Pension Fund successfully petitioned for an emergency shareholder meeting, accelerating the merger vote by 3 weeks, well before Warren had expected to face a decision point. With the vote now scheduled for late August instead of mid-September, Warren found himself fighting a compressed timeline with institutional investors increasingly skeptical of his motives. The articles about his past investment tactics had raised red flags, and his aggressive opposition campaign was starting to look less like principled concern and more like a personal vendetta. 3 days before the shareholder meetings, Harry received an unexpected visitor at his office, Veronica. "You look surprised to see me," she observed as she took a seat across from his desk. "I am," Harry admitted. "I thought you'd be staying clear of this conflict." Veronica shook her head. "That's not an option anymore. My father has escalated beyond business tactics. He's now threatening to expose details about my personal issues if I don't publicly support his position on the merger." Harry felt a surge of disgust. "He'd use your struggles with addiction against you?" "In a heartbeat," Veronica confirmed bitterly. "Family loyalty only flows one direction with Warren Blackwell." "What are you going to do?" Harry asked, genuinely concerned despite their complicated history. Veronica met his gaze directly. "I'm going to speak at both shareholder meetings. Not for you, not for Dexter, but for the truth. My father is willing to destroy companies and lives to get his way. The shareholders deserve to know exactly who they're dealing with." Her determination surprised Harry. This was a different Veronica than the woman who had participated in his financial destruction a year earlier. More grounded, more principled. "He'll retaliate," Harry warned. "You know how he operates." "I know," she acknowledged. "But I'm done being a pawn in other people's games. My father's, Dexter's, even yours." She smiled slightly at his startled expression. "Yes, yours too. I may have started as a target in your revenge plan, but I've become something more complicated now, haven't I?" Harry couldn't deny it. Somewhere in the chaos of the past months, Veronica had transformed from the villain of his story into a complex human being making her own choices, some admirable, some not, but all distinctly hers. "Whatever happens with the votes," she continued, "I want you to know that I'm facing my own mistakes now. The therapy, the financial responsibility programs, they're helping me become someone I can actually respect. Someone who makes amends rather than excuses." As she left, Harry found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that rainy Chicago night when he'd stared at divorce papers and credit card statements, consumed by betrayal and loss. The revenge he had so meticulously planned had evolved into something far more complex. A battle not just for professional vindication, but for a vision of business that created rather than destroyed. The shareholder meetings were scheduled for consecutive days. Meridian's on Thursday, Nexus's on Friday. As a Meridian meeting convened in Chicago, Harry watched via secure video link from Denver, where he was preparing for the following day's vote. Warren arrived at the Meridian meeting flanked by attorneys and financial advisors, projecting confidence despite the accelerated timeline. The meeting began with standard procedures: confirmation of quorum, review of the agenda, and formal presentation of the merger proposal. Then came the open comment period, when significant shareholders could address the assembled voters. Warren spoke first, delivering a polished argument against the merger that emphasized governance concerns and questioned the financial projections. Dexter followed with a point-by-point rebuttal, his presentation bolstered by independent analyses that supported the merger's projected benefits. The institutional investors in the audience listened attentively, their expressions revealing little. Then, to Warren's visible shock, Veronica was introduced as the next speaker. She approached the podium with calm dignity, acknowledged the assembled shareholders, and delivered a devastating account of her father's true intentions, including his attempt to use her in his campaign against the merger. "My father's opposition has nothing to do with shareholder value," she concluded. "It's about control and extraction. He sees companies not as enterprises to be built, but as assets to be stripped and sold. I urge you to approve this merger not because it benefits any individual, but because it creates something stronger than its constituent parts, something with the potential for sustainable growth that benefits employees, communities, and yes, shareholders." Warren's face had darkened progressively throughout her speech. When she finished, he rose as if to respond, then seemed to think better of it and sat back down, conferring urgently with his advisors. The vote that followed was decisive: 82% in favor of the merger, well above the required threshold and a clear repudiation of Warren's opposition campaign. The Nexus vote the following day produced an even stronger mandate, with 87% approval. Harry, addressing the shareholders before the vote, had struck a forward-looking tone, focusing not on the conflict with Warren, but on the opportunities the merged entity would pursue. Warren didn't attend the Nexus meeting, sending a representative instead, a tacit acknowledgement of defeat. By Friday evening, with both votes complete and the merger approved, Harry found himself in his office with a glass of celebratory scotch, looking out at the Denver skyline as the sunset painted the mountains in gold and purple. He had won, not just the professional victory of securing the merger, but the deeper victory of creating something durable and valuable from the ashes of his previous life. As he contemplated what lay ahead, his phone buzzed with a text from Dexter. "It's official. Warren's fund has issued a statement accepting the merger outcome and pledging constructive engagement going forward." Translation: he's surrendering. "Congratulations, Harry. See you at the closing." Harry smiled slightly, savoring the moment. The revenge he had initially sought, the complete professional destruction of Dexter and Veronica, had evolved into something more nuanced but ultimately more satisfying. He had built rather than destroyed, created value rather than extracted it, in the process discovered strengths within himself he hadn't known existed. The next chapter of his life would begin soon, with all its challenges and opportunities. But for now, Harrison Kincaid stood at the window of his Denver office, a man transformed by adversity, tempered by conflict, and ultimately victorious, not just over his enemies, but over the bitterness that had once threatened to consume him. The game was over, and he had won it on his own terms. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. The official announcement of the successful merger votes sent shockwaves through Chicago's business community. The headlines in the financial press told the story. Nexus Meridian merger approved, Kincaid to lead new financial tech powerhouse, and Warren Blackwell's opposition campaign falls short as shareholders back merger. For Harry, the weeks following the votes were consumed with integration planning and regulatory approvals. The merger's closing was scheduled for October 1st, exactly 1 year after he had joined Nexus. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. A complete revolution of his life in 12 months, from devastation to triumph. The newly formed holding company would be called Next Meridian, with headquarters in both Denver and Chicago. Harry would serve as CEO, with Bradley Price as chairman and Dexter as president of the financial services division. The technology operations would be led by Zoe Chun, whose promotion to Chief Technology Officer recognized her crucial role in the merger's success. Harry's first trip back to Chicago as the incoming CEO of Next Meridian carried an undeniable weight of personal history. As his company car pulled up to Meridian Financial's downtown headquarters, he felt a strange doubling of perception, memories of his last departure overlaid with his triumphant return. The executive floor had changed little in the 15 months since he cleaned out his office. Same mahogany paneling, same subdued lighting, same hushed atmosphere of moneyed power. But the people looked at him differently now, with respect tinged with wariness, even a hint of fear in some eyes. Dexter met him at the elevator, extending his hand with professional cordiality. Their alliance remained uneasy, built on mutual interest rather than renewed friendship. "Welcome back," Dexter said, leading him to the executive conference room where the integration team awaited. "The troops are nervous but curious. Your reputation precedes you." "Which reputation is that?" Harry asked with a touch of irony. Dexter smiled slightly. "The brilliant strategic thinker who outmaneuvered Warren Blackwell? The ruthless operator who engineered a takeover of his former employer? Take your pick." The integration meeting was productive but tense, with Meridian executives clearly uncertain about their futures under Harry's leadership. He addressed their concerns directly, emphasizing that the merger was about growth, not cost-cutting, and that talent would be valued regardless of its origin company. "I have no interest in settling old scores," he told them, his gaze steady. "What matters is who can help build Next Meridian into the industry leader it should be." After the meeting, Harry had one more stop to make, Preston Media, where Martin Chambers had requested a private discussion about their place in the new corporate structure. Preston's offices occupied 3 floors in a gleaming tower a few blocks from Meridian. As Harry stepped off the elevator, he was acutely aware that Veronica worked somewhere on these floors, though their paths weren't scheduled to cross today. Chambers greeted him with the nervous deference of a man who had bet on the wrong horse and knew it. "Harrison, thank you for making time. I know you're on a tight schedule." "Always time for a key partner," Harry replied diplomatically, following Chambers to his corner office with its panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Once seated, Chambers got straight to the point. "I need to understand where Preston stands in the new organization. The partnership agreement with Nexus is clear, but with the Meridian merger, everything feels uncertain." Harry had anticipated this concern. Preston Media remains a valued strategic partner, with the same integration points we established earlier this year. The only change is that you'll now have access to Meridian's financial products for your clients, an additional offering that should strengthen your market position. Chambers looked relieved, but still cautious. "And leadership? There have been rumors about your position." Harry finished for him. "Martin, I have no interest in micromanaging Preston. As long as the client reporting issues we identified have been addressed, and I understand they have, your leadership isn't in question." The tension visibly drained from Chambers' shoulders. "Thank you for that clarity. And there's one more thing. About Veronica Blackwell." Harry kept his expression neutral, though the mention of her name still triggered a complex emotional response. "What about her?" "Her position has become complicated," Chambers explained carefully. "Her work has improved significantly since she returned from her leave of absence. But her father's campaign against the merger, and especially her public opposition to him, has created awkward client dynamics. Some are uncomfortable working with her given the family drama." Harry considered this information. He had anticipated that Veronica might face professional consequences for her stand against Warren, but hadn't planned to intervene either way. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Chambers hesitated. "I'm not sure, honestly. Letting her go seems harsh given her recent improvements and her role in supporting the merger. But keeping her in client-facing positions may be untenable." Harry made a decision that surprised even himself. "Move her to the innovation team working on the Nexus integration. It leverages her creative skills without the client complications, and it keeps her connected to the merger's success." Chambers looked startled. "You want her involved in the integration?" "I want the best talent where it can add the most value," Harry replied evenly. Personal history aside, Veronica understands both corporate cultures and has proven creative abilities. The innovation team needs that perspective. After leaving Preston, Harry had his driver take him past his old neighborhood, the luxury high-rise on Lakeshore Drive, where he and Veronica had shared the penthouse apartment. He didn't ask to stop, merely gazed up at the building as they passed, acknowledging the life that had ended there without feeling its gravitational pull. His final meeting in Chicago was with Phoebe Winters, who had remained a trusted ally throughout the past tumultuous year. "So," she said as they settled into a corner table at their usual breakfast spot, though it was now late afternoon, "the conquering hero returns. How does it feel?" Harry considered the question seriously. "Different than I expected. Less triumphant, maybe more complex." Phoebe nodded, understanding. "Because it stopped being about revenge somewhere along the way?" "Yes," Harry acknowledged. "Or at least, not solely about revenge. At some point, building something new became more important than destroying what was old." "That's growth," Phoebe observed. "Though I have to admit, when you first came to me with this plan to use Nexus as a vehicle for taking down Dexter and Veronica, I had my doubts." Harry smiled ruefully. "You were right, too. It was partly insanity driven by pain. And yet here you are, CEO of a merged entity that includes your former employer, with your ex-wife's company as a strategic partner and your former best friend reporting to you." Phoebe raised her coffee cup in a toast. "Revenge or not, it's an impressive outcome." With unexpected complications, Harry added, "I never planned to work with Dexter again, let alone have Veronica involved in merger integration." Phoebe studied him with the perceptive gaze that had made her such an effective attorney. "Do you regret it? The shift from destruction to creation?" "No," Harry said without hesitation. "What I'm building now is more meaningful than what I'd planned to destroy. And maybe that's the real victory, not over them, but over what they did to me. The debt, the betrayal, the professional sabotage, none of it defined me in the end." That evening, as Harry prepared to fly back to Denver, he received a text from Veronica. "Chambers told me about the innovation team assignment. Not sure if it was mercy or punishment, but either way, I'll make the most of it. Good luck with the closing." Harry typed a reply before he could overthink it. Neither mercy nor punishment. Just business, right talent, right role. Make it count. On the flight back to Denver, Harry reviewed the journey that had brought him to this point. The pain that had driven him from Chicago had been transformed, not erased. The betrayal still mattered, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now were the choices he'd made since. To build rather than destroy, to lead rather than avenge, to create a future rather than dwell in the past. Warren Blackwell had made one final attempt to disrupt the merger, filing a lawsuit challenging the emergency shareholder meetings as procedurally improper. But with both votes so decisively in favor, the courts had refused to issue an injunction, and Warren had ultimately withdrawn the suit rather than face a humiliating legal defeat to add to a shareholder rebuke. Veronica had paid a price for opposing her father. Warren had cut her off completely, financially, emotionally, even instructing family members not to communicate with her. The gossip in Chicago's social circles had been brutal, painting her as both a failed wife and a disloyal daughter. Dexter, too, had faced consequences for switching sides. Several clients closely aligned with Warren had moved their business from Meridian, and some of Dexter's former allies within the firm had distanced themselves, uncertain where power would ultimately reside in the merged organization. But as the merger closing approached, a new equilibrium began to form. Those who had bet against Harry, who had written him off after the divorce as a broken man whose career was finished, now scrambled to realign themselves with the ascending power. Invitations arrived daily to speak at conferences, to join prestigious boards, to attend exclusive social functions. Harry accepted some, declined others, always with the same internal reminder: none of this validated him. His worth didn't come from external recognition or power over others. It came from what he built, what he created, the value he brought into the world. The merger closing ceremony took place on a perfect autumn day, with the aspen trees in the Colorado foothills turning gold against the evergreen backdrop. The event was held at Nexus headquarters, with key executives and board members from both companies in attendance. Harry, standing at the podium to address the assembled leaders after the final documents were signed, felt a moment of genuine pride unmixed with vindictiveness. Today marks not an ending, but a beginning, he told them. Next Meridian represents a new model of financial technology integration, one that creates value through collaboration rather than extraction. The path here wasn't always smooth, but the destination is worth the journey. As champagne was poured and congratulations exchanged, Harry found himself in a quiet moment with Bradley Price, the man who had taken a chance on him when his professional reputation was at its lowest. "You exceeded all expectations," Price told him, genuine admiration in his voice. "When Josephine first suggested you for the CFO role, I was skeptical. A banker from Chicago with a messy divorce and departure from his firm? It seemed risky." "It was," Harry acknowledged. "For both of us." Price shook his head. "The risk was mine. You had nothing left to lose. But you didn't just rebuild your own career. You transformed Nexus in the process." He raised his glass to proving conventional wisdom wrong. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Harry stepped outside onto the headquarters terrace, needing a moment of solitude to process the culmination of the year's events. The Denver skyline glittered against the darkening eastern sky, while the mountains to the west were silhouetted against the last orange glow of sunset. He was surprised when Dexter joined him, also seemingly seeking a break from the festivities. "Hell of a year," Dexter commented, leaning against the railing beside Harry. "That's one way to put it," Harry agreed. A comfortable silence fell between them. Not friendship, exactly, but a wary respect that might, in time, evolve into something more positive than their current détente. "For what it's worth," Dexter said finally, "I think you've built something important here. Something that matters beyond the balance sheet." Harry glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "We'll see," he replied. "The real work begins tomorrow." As Dexter nodded and returned inside, Harry remained on the terrace, contemplating the view and the journey. The revenge he had initially sought had transformed into something far more meaningful. A second chance not just at professional success, but at defining himself on his own terms. Harrison Kincaid, the broken man who had left Chicago with nothing but debts and betrayal, no longer existed. In his place stood the CEO of Next Meridian, a man who had learned that true power came not from destroying enemies, but from creating something they couldn't ignore or diminish. The reckoning was complete, and it had ended not with destruction, but with transformation of companies, of relationships, and most significantly, of himself. Chapter 9. The Resolution. 6 months after the merger closing, Next Meridian had exceeded even the most optimistic financial projections. The integration had proceeded smoothly, with the complementary strengths of both companies creating new opportunities that neither could have pursued alone. Harry, settling into his role as CEO, had established a leadership style that balanced strategic vision with operational discipline. The headquarters split between Denver and Chicago symbolized the merger's approach, maintaining the strengths of both organizations while creating something greater than the sum of its parts. On a crisp spring morning, Harry arrived at the Chicago offices for the quarterly leadership summit. The transition from visitor to leader was now complete. The executive suite had been redesigned to reflect the merged company's identity, and the staff greeted him with the comfortable respect of a team that had found its rhythm. Zoe Chun, who had relocated to Chicago to oversee the technology integration, met him with a tablet displaying the latest performance metrics. "We're outperforming the integration targets by 12%, she reported as they walked toward the conference room. "And client retention is at 97%, well above the industry standard for post-merger periods." Harry nodded approvingly. "The Preston Media integration?" "On schedule," Zoe confirmed. "The innovation team has actually accelerated some of the technical integration points. They've been surprisingly effective." The innovation team, which included Veronica. Harry had received regular updates on their progress, but had maintained professional distance, neither avoiding nor seeking direct interaction with his ex-wife. The Leadership Summit brought together the top executives from all divisions of Next Meridian, including Dexter Calloway, whose leadership of the Financial Services Division had proven more effective than many had expected. Whatever personal feelings remained between them, their professional relationship had settled into a productive rhythm. Before we begin, Harry addressed the assembled leaders. I want to acknowledge something important. 6 months ago, many industry observers predicted this merger would fail. They cited cultural differences, historical competition, and personal complications. A knowing smile touched his lips at the last point, acknowledged by subtle nods around the table. But what they failed to understand, he continued, was that those very differences, when properly leveraged, create strength rather than weakness. We've proven that thesis with our results, and I expect we'll continue to prove it in the quarters ahead. The meeting proceeded efficiently, with each division reporting progress and identifying challenges. When the innovation team's turn came, its director, Lucas Wilford, presented the accelerated integration timeline with obvious pride. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction, Lucas explained, displaying a complex diagram of systems architecture. One of our team members identified a parallel processing approach that allows us to maintain separate client interfaces while integrating the backend systems much more quickly. Which team member? Harry asked, though he suspected the answer. Veronica Blackwell, Lucas confirmed. She collaborated with our technical leads to translate the client experience requirements into system architecture priorities. It's been remarkably effective. Harry nodded, acknowledging the contribution without additional comment. But after the meeting, he requested a walkthrough of the innovation team's workspace to see the integration approach firsthand. The team occupied a large, open area with digital displays covering the walls and workstations arranged in collaborative clusters. Veronica was in the midst of explaining a client journey map to several developers when Harry and Lucas entered. She faltered momentarily upon seeing him, then recovered her professional composure. Mr. Kincaid, we were just discussing the customer authentication integration. Would you like an overview? Please, Harry replied, maintaining the formal distance that had characterized their limited interactions since the merger. For the next 20 minutes, Veronica led a detailed explanation of the integration approach, demonstrating a technical understanding that surprised Harry. She had always been creative, but this level of technical engagement was new, a skill clearly developed through focused effort in recent months. Impressive work, Harry acknowledged when the presentation concluded. The parallel processing approach solves several problems we anticipated would take months longer. Thank you, Veronica replied simply. It was a team effort. As the tour continued to other areas, Lucas mentioned quietly to Harry, she's been a revelation, honestly. Works harder than anyone. Never mentions her connection to you or to Warren, just focuses on delivering results. Whatever else happened before, she's an asset to this team now. Harry nodded, processing this information along with his own observations. The Veronica he had seen today, focused, collaborative, technically engaged, was a far cry from the woman whose spending addiction and betrayal had nearly destroyed him. Later that afternoon, as Harry was reviewing reports in the CEO's office, his assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Warren Blackwell. Send him in, Harry decided after a moment's consideration. Warren entered with the same commanding presence he had always possessed, though Harry noted subtle signs of strain, slight weight loss, new lines around his eyes, a certain tightness to his mouth. Harrison, Warren greeted him, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. I see my old office has been redecorated. The view remains excellent, however. What can I do for you, Warren? Harry asked directly, not interested in verbal sparring. Warren studied him with calculating eyes. I've come with a proposition. My fund is interested in divesting its Next Meridian holdings, all of them, in a single transaction. Before taking them to the open market, I thought I'd offer you right of first refusal. Harry kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. Warren selling his entire position represented a significant shift in strategy and a tacit admission of defeat in their long-running conflict. Why now? Harry asked. The company is performing well. Most analysts project continued growth. Let's call it a rebalancing of priorities, Warren replied smoothly. My fund is exploring opportunities in other sectors. Harry didn't believe that for a moment. Something else was driving this decision, something Warren wasn't acknowledging. And this has nothing to do with Veronica's role in the innovation team. Harry suggested, watching carefully for the reaction. A flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or pain, crossed Warren's face before he mastered it. My daughter made her choices, he said coldly. Her involvement with this company is irrelevant to my investment decisions. But Harry had seen the momentary vulnerability and understood its significance. Despite his ruthlessness in business, Warren had been genuinely hurt by Veronica's public stand against him. The estrangement between them was taking a toll that the older man refused to acknowledge openly. I'll have our team evaluate the offering, Harry said, returning to business. Current market value, no premium. Warren's mouth tightened. The block size alone warrants a premium. 5% above market. 2%, Harry countered. And a non-disparagement agreement covering all parties. A calculating look entered Warren's eyes. Including Veronica? Especially Veronica, Harry confirmed. No more attempts to undermine her professionally or personally. Whatever issues exist between you remain private matters. Warren considered this, then nodded once. Acceptable. My lawyers will draft the agreements. After Warren left, Harry sat motionless for several minutes, absorbing the significance of this development. Warren's exit would remove the last major point of tension in the merged company's ownership structure. It represented the final resolution of the conflict that had begun with Harry's discovery of Veronica and Dexter's betrayal nearly 2 years earlier. That evening, Harry had dinner with Phoebe Winters, who had recently been appointed Next Meridian's general counsel, a role that recognized her crucial contributions to the merger's success. Warren's selling his entire position, Harry told her as they settled into their meals at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. We're buying it back at a minimal premium. Phoebe's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's unexpected. I thought he'd maintain a position just to keep a foot in the door and to irritate you. I think the Veronica situation affected him more than he'll admit, Harry replied. Having his daughter not just refuse to help him, but actively oppose him, that cut deeper than he expected. And what about you? Phoebe asked perceptively. How do you feel about Veronica now? I notice you assigned her to the innovation team, rather than letting Chambers edge her out. Harry considered the question carefully. I don't know, he admitted finally. The anger isn't gone, but it's muted. Seeing her channel her creative energy into productive work instead of destructive spending. Watching her stand up to Warren, even knowing the personal cost. It doesn't erase what happened, but complicates the narrative. Humans are complicated, Phoebe observed. Rarely all good or all bad. Even those who hurt us the most. The next morning, Harry had an early breakfast meeting with Dexter at a small cafe near the office. These one-on-one sessions had become a regular occurrence. Professional necessity evolving into something that, while not friendship, at least approached mutual respect. Warren's selling his position. Harry informed him as they reviewed the financial services division's quarterly projections. We're buying it back. The agreements should be finalized by the end of the week. Dexter looked up from the reports, genuinely surprised. That's a major strategic shift for him. Any idea what triggered it? Veronica, Harry replied simply. At least partly. The public rejection by his daughter cut deeper than his pride can acknowledge. Dexter nodded slowly. She's paid a high price for standing against him. Not just financially, but socially. Chicago's old money circles have mostly sided with Warren, not because they believe he's right, but because that's how their world works. Loyalty above all, especially to family patriarchs. The insight into Veronica's current social situation was new to Harry. He'd been aware of the financial consequences. Warren had indeed cut her off completely, but had given little thought to the broader social implications of her stand. She seems focused on the work, Harry observed neutrally. She is, Dexter confirmed, but it's been a difficult adjustment. From socialite with unlimited resources to innovation team member living on a corporate salary. He hesitated, then added, We're not together anymore, if you were wondering. Haven't been since before the merger vote. Harry had suspected as much, but hadn't asked. Professional complications? He inquired, keeping his tone casual. Partly, Dexter acknowledged. But mostly recognition that what brought us together wasn't a foundation for anything lasting. Mutual unhappiness, opportunity, forbidden attraction. None of that sustains a relationship once the circumstances change. After the meeting, Harry found himself walking through the innovation team's workspace again, this time unannounced. The team was in the midst of a problem-solving session, with Veronica leading a discussion at a whiteboard covered in diagrams and annotations. She noticed him hovering at the periphery and, after concluding her point, excused herself to approach him. 2 visits in 2 days, she observed. Should the team be worried? Not at all, Harry assured her. The progress reports are impressive. I wanted to see more of the authentication solution you presented yesterday. Veronica looked skeptical, but led him to a quieter area with a digital display where she could demonstrate the system in more detail. As she walked him through the technical components, Harry studied her with new awareness. The Veronica before him, now, was noticeably different from the woman he had married. Not just physically, though she had lost the unhealthy thinness of her addiction days and gained a healthier glow, but in her manner and focus. She spoke with passion about solving real problems rather than creating perfect appearances. Your father came to see me yesterday, Harry said when the technical explanation concluded. He's selling his position in Next Meridian. Veronica stilled, absorbing this information. All of it. The entire stake, Harry confirmed. We're buying it back. A complex mixture of emotions crossed her face. Sadness, resignation, perhaps a hint of relief. I'm not surprised, she said finally. Holding a position in a company where his daughter publicly opposed him was probably too much for his pride. It's a positive development for the company, Harry noted. Removes a potential source of ongoing conflict. Veronica nodded agreement, then hesitated before asking, How is he? Did he seem okay? The question revealed a vulnerability that caught Harry off guard. After everything Warren had done, she still cared about his well-being. It was a reminder of the complexity of family bonds, even damaged ones. He seemed like himself, Harry replied carefully. Perhaps a bit more strained than usual, but essentially unchanged. Veronica nodded again, accepting this assessment. Thank you for telling me. And thank you for the innovation team assignment. It's been challenging in the best way. As Harry returned to his office, he found himself reflecting on how completely his understanding of Veronica had evolved. The cartoon villain of his revenge fantasies had been replaced by a flawed but striving human being, someone who had made terrible mistakes but was genuinely working to build something better from the ruins. The same could be said for his view of Dexter, though that relationship remained more complicated. The betrayal had cut deeper given their friendship, and the professional competition added layers of complexity that didn't exist with Veronica. Yet even there, Harry recognized growth. In himself, as much as in Dexter. The all-consuming need to destroy his former friend had been replaced by a capacity to work together effectively, to leverage Dexter's genuine talents while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The week concluded with the formal announcement of the stock buyback from Warren's fund, presented to the markets as a strategic reallocation of capital on both sides. The financial press noted the development with interest, but without the breathless speculation that had characterized coverage of the merger battle. Blackwell exits Next Meridian position as company exceeds integration targets, read the Wall Street Journal headline. The accompanying analysis suggested the move represented a normalization of relations after the contentious merger process. Harry, reading the coverage in his Denver apartment that weekend, found himself in a contemplative mood. The formal exit of Warren Blackwell from Next Meridian's ownership structure represented the final resolution of the conflicts that had defined the past 2 years of his life. The revenge he had initially sought had evolved into something far more meaningful. The creation of a company that embodied his values and vision, professional redemption that came not from destroying others, but from building something valuable, and personal growth that allowed him to see even those who had betrayed him with greater complexity and, increasingly a measure of compassion. A notification on his phone interrupted his thoughts. An email from Veronica with the subject line Innovation Team Breakthrough. He opened it to find a detailed explanation of a new integration approach the team had developed, with potential applications across multiple business lines. The technical content was impressive, but it was the closing paragraph that caught his attention. I know our personal history complicates professional communication, but I wanted to share this directly given its strategic implications. The team has worked incredibly hard to develop this solution, and it represents exactly the kind of cross-company innovation the merger was designed to foster. Whatever else has happened between us, I'm proud to be part of building something meaningful here. Harry found himself typing a reply before fully considering the implications. The solution looks promising. Schedule a formal presentation for the executive committee next week. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're finding meaning in the work. Building is always more satisfying than destroying. A lesson I've learned these past 2 years as well. As he sent the message, Harry realized it represented yet another step in the long, complicated process of moving forward. Not by forgetting the past or minimizing the harm done, but by acknowledging it while refusing to be defined by it. The triumphant revenge he had once envisioned, Veronica and Dexter professionally ruined, socially ostracized, financially destroyed, now seemed hollow compared to what he had actually achieved. A thriving company built partly on their talents, directed toward goals he valued, operating according to principles he believed in. He realized, genuinely happy, not with vindictive satisfaction, but with a deeper contentment that came from creating rather than destroying, from growth rather than stagnation, from the future rather than the past. The story that had begun with betrayal and loss. His ex-wife who had cheated on him with his best friend, who had left him with crushing debt, who had then found herself reporting to him as the new owner of her company, had evolved into something far more interesting and nuanced than a simple revenge tale. It had become a story of transformation, of companies merged to create greater value, of people facing their flaws and finding new strengths, and most importantly, of Harrison Kincaid himself, who had journeyed from devastated victim to architect of his own resurrection. Outside his window, the Denver mountains stood eternal against the setting sun.